Chapter 304 puts down the evil freaks. An absolutely terrifying force swept over toward Yi Shiwen and engulfed him. His divinities immediately swept out of his body, wrapping the Mo siblings and the wolf cub, and pushing them back several dozen feet before coming to a half. At this time, a terrible explosion occurred and blasted a huge crater in the ground. Yi Shiwen looked up and saw a general in magnificent golden armor. His icy cold eyes were staring at Yi Shiwen. His golden scaly armor was glowing breathtakingly in the sunlight. He held an iron spear in his hands. The spear was suffused with anger and fearful resentment, whose extent was simply unimaginable. Who could say how many enemies had been slaughtered by this ominous spear? He was riding an unusual black steed whose hooves were glowing with spooky black flames coming out of them. One could easily tell that this horse was an extraordinary breed of horse-type demon beasts. The sky was obscured by the black flames that soon began to corrode the surrounding space that started to burn and produce sizzling sound. The spectators held their breaths when they realized that the general in golden armor was riding a steed of legendary realm, indicating that he himself must be of higher level. Yi Shiwen, surrender your sword command or it'd be difficult for you to escape death today. The golden-armored general said in a cold voice. The sense of command in his voice was leaving no scope for negotiation. Undoubtedly, he was a powerhouse from the older generation whose cultivation had already reached the peak of legendary first stage. He aspired to fight for the dragon essence in order to enhance his cultivation furthermore. He was one of the several powerhouses of the older generation who obtained news about the appearance of sword commands. And why not? After all, when City's government office was also involved in this competition, why shouldn't the other powerhouses of the older generation? In this chaotic situation when the top players of the younger generation were going contend with each other for the ultimate treasure, the top players of the older generation were also prepared to make good use of their advantage as experienced experts with as much as 4 times more experience than their younger counterparts. Compared to them, the top players of the younger generation were too tender and inexperienced. At this time, there sounded another loud laughter. It was creepy laughter that came from far away. Yi Shiwen, so long as you hand over the sword command, I, your grandpa Kuemo, will guarantee your safety. I will also allow you to enter my practice cave and work as my personal disciple. Keep this in mind that if you accept my offer, you are going to be 1 in a million to enjoy such a privilege. As soon as the voice fell, accompanied by a ghostly wind, a black-robed figure appeared over the horizon. It was a tall, skinny and ugly-looking old man who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere like a ghostly apparition. Kuemo ancestor, you dare to snatch the sword command from me? The golden-armored generation angrily stared at the black-robed man. A surge of imposing aura rushed out of his body and went toward the old ancestor. Hump, what's wrong with that, huh? Why cannot I have a sword command? Kuemo waved his hand, and the imposing aura suddenly disappeared without a trace. It was as if he did not pay any attention to the golden-armored general. Kuemo, so you think my army cannot trample flat your cave? The golden-armored general thundered. There was rage in his voice, overflowing with majestic imposing aura. You can try. Kuemo replied. I will just turn you into a human puppet. They want the sword command so badly. Yi Shiwen smiled. Listen freaks, stop fighting among yourselves. You all can come at me together. What are you two arguing about? Stop this nonsense. I know this little brother is smart and really understands people. He is definitely going to choose this elder sister as the owner of his sword command. At this time, a charming voice sounded from afar. A burst of fragrance invaded the surroundings as a graceful figure came strolling from the distant horizon. She appeared to be in her 20s and had a very beautiful and seductive body. Her face was covered with only a thin while her private parts were moving seductively with her movements. Indeed, she looked very sultry. Several experts saw her and could not help but secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. This woman was just too tempting. As this woman continued to stroll forward, she was leaving behind a trail of pink fragrance. The experts who were in the range immediately found their complexion turn red, along with their wild fantasies being stirred at the same time. Yi Mo was floating behind Yi Shiwen, and even his face turned bright red. His reaction was really spectacular and unprecedented. Gee, this woman looks so seductive. She seems to have comprehended a profound seduction technique. No wonder the ordinary experts have no way to resist her charm. Yemo said. Among the devils, even the infamous clan of Succubus does not have such a high level of seductiveness. Yi Shiwen was unaffected by this burst of fragrance as was being protected by the cloak of golden divinities that were keeping off any outside interference, whether physical or non-physical in nature. Hu Meinyang, I never expected you get involved in the matters of Wang heavenly faction. Kumo ancestor turned toward the seductive woman and said with a creepy smile, well, what do you know, my ancestors and Wang heavenly faction seem to have some old connections. So I am planning to get myself a sword command. I am sure this little brother will help his elder sister in fulfilling her goal. Hu Meinyang gave a seductive look to Yi Shiwen and smiled. Standing nearby, many experts secretly gulped their saliva. That woman's seductive aura was making them go wild and compelling them to contemplate romantic mischief. However, no one dared to rush forward. Although this woman was simply irresistible, she had quite a reputation in Yangon City for being an ominous witch who enjoyed brutally torturing and killing young experts. She had her own sadistic methods of killing men, and was well known for her depraved evil arts, killing countless in her lifetime. Her hands were completely covered in blood. No one was foolish enough to face such an ominous woman. Yi Shiwen was not at all budged. Instead, he spoke in a calm voice while carrying a cold smile on his face. You guys have really let me down. I am truly disappointed. I was expecting to be challenged by a powerful figure, but what did I get? You all are just a bunch of freaks that are practically begging to be put down. So, you are not going to surrender the sword command to me? Kumo asked in a dull voice. If you want me to hand it over so badly, why don't you try and make me do it? Yi Shiwen smirked. Boy, you are courting death. The general couldn't control the sudden burst of anger, and immediately rode the steed toward Yi Shiwen. His dreadful imposing aura was constantly locking onto Yi Shiwen. Shwa. A loud piercing sound came out of the blue, and an iron spear flew toward Yi Shiwen to assassinate him. In the endless ocean of roaring and resentful souls, lingering around the spear, the might of the spear continued to surge as it punctured the vault of heaven, and arrived right in front of Yi Shiwen. The spectators held their breaths. Their complexions paled as they suddenly realized that a peerless genius like Yi Shiwen had committed the biggest mistake of his life. His strength was on par with the fifth god, but he was still too young to be competing with the older generation. He was barely 20 years old, whereas the golden-armored general was 4 times his age, or even more. There was no way Yi Shiwen could compete with him and live. Yi Shiwen moved instantly, like a golden lightning jumping through the clouds, and blasted his palm that instantly transformed into a golden coiling dragon, and rushed toward the enemy. Boom! The coiling dragon collided with the iron spear, and this resulted into a massive explosion. Bang! Along with a deafening explosive noise, a strange yet horrifying energy channeled through the spear, and leaped toward the golden-armored general. Crash bang! As if being punctured in the jaws of death, his golden armor cracked open and blood spattered out from the cracks. Even the divine steed was pushed back several steps by this explosion. Yi Shiwen's power was just extremely terrifying. The golden-armored general quickly healed the injury in his hand, and looked at Yi Shiwen with an incredible look in his eyes. His army had fought for hundreds of years, and each time they faced a strong opponent, he would fight at the front and wreak havoc on the enemy forces, sweeping everything on the battlefield. He would always rely on his outstanding power and destructive capability to weaken the energy forces. However, today he was made to have a taste of his own medicine by Yi Shiwen. He certainly didn't know that his so-called destructive power was nothing in front of Yi Shiwen's divine power. Yi Shiwen was not in a mood to waste time on this general. He immediately summoned the Han seal in the sky and rushed toward the general. Die! The general roared, and regardless of a huge mountain of energy falling down from the sky, he rushed straight toward Yi Shiwen. His plan was to kill Yi Shiwen before Han seal's impact. He was extremely fast and appeared in front of Yi Shiwen in a flash. Shwa! Yi Shiwen stretched out his hand that was wrapped in divinities. He directly grabbed the spear, and this clash set off a storm of rogue energy in all direction. This is impossible. The general looked incredibly at Yi Shiwen. He couldn't believe his eyes. His spear was unable to pierce Yi Ziwen's hand. In fact, it couldn't even put a scratch on his skin. He thought, just what was the extent of this youngster's toughness? Nothing is impossible in this world, now go to hell. Yi Shiwen sneered, and the Han seal finally smashed down. Boom! With a horrendous noise, both the general and his steed were smashed by the Han seal. Even at the point of death, the general couldn't believe how Yi Ziwen's body could be so formidable. Kuemo and Hu Meinyang couldn't believe what they just saw. With their eyes wide open and an incredible look in them, they were staring at Yi Shiwen. They just couldn't understand how a youngster like Yi Shiwen managed to kill a veteran general in such a short period of time. Not to mention, they soon realized that they had messed with the wrong guy. Now it's your turn. Chapter 305. Small World opens. However, Yi Shiwen did not give them the opportunity to renege on their words. Some people refuse to admit their deeds until they are faced with grim reality. Not to mention this road was full of trials. The moment these three experts underestimated Yi Shiwen and attempted to snatch the sword command from him, it was confirmed that Yi Shiwen would teach them a proper lesson and establish an example in front of everyone. In this world, one could set up one's prestige and reputation by deterring the opposite side. You are next. Yi Shiwen pointed at old man Kuemo and said in an indifferent tone. Both Kuemo and Hu Meinyang were immediately scared in their heart. The trio had long been rampant in and around the Yangon city. They had quite an illustrious reputation for being ominous experts of the older generation. All three of them were equally powerful, and since one was killed so easily by Yi Shiwen, the other two were bound to get frightened. Yi Shiwen did not give them enough time to think. He instantly slammed his foot on the ground and rushed forward like a golden general from the myths. He instantly appeared in front of Kuemo and shot his palm, releasing waves of divine golden chi. It seemed as if a sea of golden energy blotted out the sky and was approaching Kuemo at an overwhelming speed. Kuemo finally realized that he messed with the wrong guy. And sometimes, even a century worth of cultivation and experience would turn out to be worthless in saving his life. Hu Meinyang, hurry up and help me out, damn it. If you don't help me quickly, he will certainly go after you after killing me. Kuemo did not give any thought to his demeanor or grace and shamelessly shouted for help. Hu Meinyang also knew the fact about the interdependence of two neighboring states, while facing a much powerful enemy state. She immediately shot her palm. Her beautiful hand instantly blossomed like peach flower, seemingly floating in the air but cracking the space in its path. This attack was exceptionally beautiful yet fearsome. Yi Shiwen simply ignored this attack and directed a seemingly endless amount of dreadful divine waves toward his target, the old man. Kuemo panicked and resorted to using his skinny hands to protect himself from the surging golden waves coming at him. Bang! With a loud noise, the surrounding space collapsed in a flash, followed by a heart-wrenching sound of fracturing bones. Kumo's hands couldn't block the impact of surging energy waves and were torn apart. The might of Yi Ziwen's gilded tyrant form was extremely formidable. At this time, Hu Meinyang's attack finally crashed into Yi Ziwen's golden body. Clang! There sounded a loud metal clanging sound, as if her attack collided with a golden statue and dissipated. Yi Ziwen's body was exuding a divine aura that simply didn't allow the attack to approach him. His stout yet slim body was entirely unaffected by this. Yi Ziwen's non-stop offensives kept on rushing towards Kuemo. Yi Shiwen suddenly stretched out his hand to send a big hand condensed out of golden energy towards the old man. Bang! Kuemo was perplexed by the barrage of attacks and simply didn't have the time or means to respond. There was no way for him to react in time, as he never expected that Yi Shiwen would simply ignore Hu Meinyang's attacks and focus entirely on him. He was instantly grabbed by the big hand and crushed, turning his body into a ball of blood fog. Hu Meinyang exclaimed as she saw the second member of the infamous trio being killed mercilessly by Yi Shiwen. Immediately after it happened, Yi Shiwen instantly shot again. In a single step, he arrived in front of her like a flash of lightning. Hu Meinyang's face at this moment no longer had that same seductive look. Instead, it was full of fear and disbelief. Yi Shiwen had taken a ruthless approach toward the trio from the beginning, and she was certainly not going to be an exception. Her fear was understandable. After all, Yi Shiwen had killed 2 veterans of older generation in a blink of an eye. Boom! Yi Shiwen shot his palm towards her. She quickly responded by attempting to block the attack. But how could she be his opponent? Bang! With a dull thumping sound, the space around them collapsed suddenly from the impact of his palm attack. Hu Mainyang was sent flying. She suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood in mid-flight. Her white skin turned bright red, making people think that this was really cruel to be done to her. However, Yi Ziwen's facial expression didn't change. With the usual cold look on his face, he summoned the Han seal in the sky and smashed it down. Boom! Han seal dropped upon Hu Mainyang and smashed her death, leaving nothing but an awful patch of blood and meat behind. A lot of experts held their breaths as they saw this terrible scene. Yi Shiwen was really a ruthless and heartless guy. How could he be so cruel to a beautiful woman like her? They didn't know that Yi Shiwen didn't differentiate between genders whenever it came to dealing with his enemies. So long as there was an enemy in front of him, he wouldn't consider their gender or status before killing them. It's over. Come on, let's go. Yi Shiwen said dismissively to his team. At this time, a figure appeared in the sky and flew by at an incredible speed. This figure was full of killing intention, clad in magnificent clothing, and appeared as cold as ice. It was recognized that this person was actually one of the 7-star lords of the Destruction Army. At this time, the warriors of Destruction Army had their bodies covered in blood, indicating that they just arrived from a bloody battle, apparently ambushed just like Yi Shiwen for the sword command. Several experts looked at Yi Ziwen's flawless state. Then they turned around to look at the miserable state of Destruction Army and suddenly gasped. How could a youngster like him be so strong? Even 3 of the well-known powerhouses of the older generation were not his matches, and were slaughtered mercilessly within moments. There had the advantage of having a century worth of experience, perhaps even more. But a rare genius like Yi Shiwen appeared out of nowhere and smashed them like ants. Yi Shiwen crossed hands behind his back and went all the way to the mountains. Soon, he arrived near a stretch of flat land on the mountainside which was apparently plagued by strong sandstorms. The strong winds blew occasionally to reveal a large square. It most likely was the residence of the Lost Wang Heavenly faction. Once a prosperous and extremely large sect was now ruined to such an extent. In the inner parts of the square, the crowd of Army of God was gathered around the 5th god who was proudly watching everyone. He was really like an authentic deity general. In front of the Army of God, several corpses were lined up on the ground. It would raise people's palpitation if they found out that these were all experts of the legendary realm. But they fell into the hands of the Army of God and lost their lives. The 5th god also killed several experts for military glory. Standing on the left of the Army of God was the group of Yangon city government, headed by the city's patron saint. There were several corpses lined up in front of them as well, but not as many as the ones laid in front of the Army of God. This was because of the fact that Yangon city's patron saint was a reputed expert, and no one dared to mess with him. Even among the experts of the older generation fighter, it was a well-known fact to stay away from him. The black-robed expert was standing next to the crowd of Yangon city government. His black robe was covered with stains of blood all over. He must have experienced a bloody battle before arriving here. Obviously, at this time, everyone's gaze fell upon the new visitor, Yi Shiwen. He could feel their gazes probing him from all directions, but he just didn't care and took a position. Yi Shiwen felt like he had a familiar feeling, but it was only part of his fleeting thoughts. Then he looked to the other side, on the right-hand side of the Army of God, and saw Genie Young Master. He was clad in a fine brocaded uniform of Genie Guards. Just like the crow of Yangon city government, even their front was clean thanks to their ominous reputation as the largest organization of spies and assassins in the Ming Empire. Hence no one dared to mess with them on the way. The forces of Destruction Army were stationed beside Genie Young Master's team in blood-stained clothes. Besides the current owners of the 8 sword commands, several other experts were also present on the scene, and were excitedly discussing about the sword command owners. Of course, a lot of them were at half-step legendary realm, but no one dared to mess with them in any way because these sword command owners had slaughtered their way to this spot after facing several hurdles, not to mention they also had the backing of big influences. They must not be provoked at any cost, because those who already did were the most unfortunate ones. Since all are here, let's get started, said the fifth god and looked coldly at Yi Shiwen, as if looking at a dead man. Rumble. Along with an ear-shattering bellow that resounded everywhere, a huge portal appeared out of thin air with 8 giant keyholes, having the appearance of scabbards. This portal had a very conspicuous appearance, and it released a surge of desolate breath into the sky that immediately had a repression effect on everyone. The door leading to the relics of Wang Heavenly Faction is going to open now. Be prepared, everybody. At this time, the leader of Yangon city government with unfathomable breath shouted. Suddenly, a streamer of light flew toward the portal. A sword command automatically inserted itself into one of the keyholes, and suddenly, as if after having received some kind of stimulus, the huge portal started rumbling and trembling. Immediately, the other sword command owners also allowed their sword commands to depart towards the keyholes, including the black-robed expert. Even Yi Shiwen was no exception. When the last key went inside the keyhole, a door appeared in the portal, and it started to open slowly. There was nothing but misty whiteness on the other side of the door. Let's go. Yi Shiwen shouted and was the first in his team to rush out, followed by the wolf cub and the Mo siblings. A total of 4 figures blazed out like beams of light and crossed the portal. The black-robed expert also rushed into the portal and instantly vanished without a trace. When Yi Ziwen's team crossed to the other side of the portal, they suddenly felt like everything around them was gone, leaving behind only chaos to welcome them. After stepping into chaos, Yi Shiwen could certainly feel the space around him twisting, turning and breaking apart. If not for the aura of protection originating from the sword command, Yi Shiwen estimated that they would all be directly torn to pieces in this chaos. Yi Shiwen knew that they were supposed to pass through numerous layers of different space before reaching the Wang Heavenly Faction's small world. Although the entrance to this small space was located near the Yangon city, its real location was not known to anyone. In fact, no one was told about the specific location of a martial arts station, besides a handful of high-level officials. Or else if the location was found, then the hostile forces would be able to directly tear the space to infiltrate. And that would definitely be a huge disaster for a martial arts station. Yiyuan School also had a small world, and its entrance was hidden in the depths of Yiyuan School's mountain forest. The real secrets of Yiyuan School were stored up safely in that small world, and its true location was not revealed to anyone. Only a handful of elders would stand guard perennially to protect the small world, and one must pass through all those guarding elders to enter the small world. Not to mention there were tokens similar to the sword commands to go inside. Hence, if there was a strong enemy invasion and Yiyuan School was completely destroyed, this small world would act as the perfect hiding place to block out all the enemies, because even if the enemy managed to find the entrance to the small world and shattered the portal, they wouldn't be able to reach the small world without the guidance from the tokens. Not to mention, it was a near impossible task to find this small world in the midst of chaotic space turbulence. Chapter 306. Wolf Cub under heavenly tribulation. Perhaps even the founder of Yiyuan School did not know the real location of its secret small space inside the chaotic space. In other words, it would be a near impossible task for the enemy to randomly tear up space to pinpoint the location of Yiyuan School's secret space. This was a way to safeguard the existence of a martial arts sect, like the Final Lifeline. Space was constantly distorting, fragmenting, and breaking apart. It was as if the universe itself was disillusioned, with space debris floating around everywhere. It was a spectacular scene, a gorgeous one but extremely dangerous at the same time. Although Yi Shiwen had confidence in his gilded tyrant body, he was still cautious because there was a possibility that bumping into those fragments of space debris might cut his golden body. If he was in Sage Realm, then only he would truly have a certain ability to withstand space debris. Boom! The distortion in space vanished all of a sudden, and they were greeted with bright scenery. Yes, they had entered the secret ruins of the Wang Heavenly Faction. Even the desolation of this place was pleasant to the eye. All one could see was a desolate scene of endless mountains everywhere. No one could say for sure, but this place had been neglected for thousands of years. Usually, a small space like this one would be governed, maintained periodically, and would have active spiritual arteries to maintain a continuous production of Lingqi, giving vitality to this world. However, this space was left abandoned for too long. Even the spiritual arteries had started drying up. Vast stretch of barren land indicated a mass-scale death of vegetation. The space deterioration had also begun. If left untouched, this space would completely collapse in coming millenniums. As soon as the dragon veins would die, this space would have almost nothing to hold on to. One cold sea ruins of some ancient structures, disclosing a bit about this place's history and vicissitudes. Roar. A loud beastly roar came from a distant place, followed by a series of beast roars coming from all directions. These roars belonged to the demon beasts that were originally sent to this small space as captives, to act as prey for the disciples of Wang heavenly faction. However, the disciples were long gone and the demon beast had flourished over time, spreading throughout this entire small space. Roar! 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 The roaring sound was getting louder and louder as if the source of the roar was getting closer. Suddenly, a giant red griffin, with its whole body covered in flames, appeared out of nowhere and attacked. Yi Shiwen was at the front. Initially, he couldn't tell what kind of bird it was until he saw its real form in the flames. It had a mouthful of sharp teeth, and it opened its huge mouth to bite Yi Shiwen. Bang! As soon as the griffin arrived right in front of Yi Shiwen, he slapped it directly on the face, and it immediately died a tragic death. The demon beasts in this small world are surprisingly so powerful. Yi Shiwen said that although he had slapped a griffin to death, it was definitely a demon beast of complete truth realm. Yi Shiwen soon discovered a large flock of griffins, each having the strength equivalent of truth 7th or 8th stage, flying towards his team. There were a few half-step legendary level demon beasts in that flock as well. Boom! A large section of fluctuating sword ki emerged from Yi Ziwen's hand and went straight into the sky. It seemed as if the sky itself was pierced by a sword as the sword ki further went forward and crashed into the flock of griffins. Slash! With a loud piercing sound, the sword ki delimited a wide path through that huge flock of griffins in a split second, butchering numerous griffins almost instantly. However, there still were an overwhelming number of griffins rushing towards Yi Shiwen and his team. Yi Shiwen had a serious look on his face as he said, "Be prepared." As soon as his voice fell, the flock of griffins overran them. The wolf cub had a cultivation of half-step legendary realm, and thus had the capability to deal with this situation, but the Mo siblings were in distress. They were in complete truth realm, and being surrounded by a large number of griffins that were at truth 7th or 8th stage was truly disadvantageous for them. Not to mention, they didn't stand a chance against the griffins of complete truth realm and half-step legendary realm. But the good news was that Yi Shiwen had already taken care of this problem by pinpointing and killing the formidable griffins first. The remaining ones were not powerful enough to be a threat to the lives of the Mo siblings. They all knew that this would be a rare opportunity to gain experience, because Yi Shiwen was on their side, watching over them. He wouldn't let them have any problems. In the following half-a-month period, Yi Shiwen continued on a killing spree. God knows how many demon beasts were slaughtered during that time. Several ethnic groups of demon beasts had cropped up in this small world, and the lack of human presence had contributed to a vast explosion in their population. Yi Shiwen just wanted to kill these demon beasts left and right, because there were just too many of them available on the platter. Ordinary people couldn't imagine how Yi Shiwen and his team continued the killing spree for several days nonstop without a moment of rest. As they were venturing deeper into the depths, the demon beasts were getting stronger and fiercer. After reaching a certain point, they only found the demon beasts of complete truth realm. Such type of rigorous practice with back-to-back battles was the most effective way to level up. The Mo siblings finally stepped into half-step legendary realm, and after having passed through numerous battles, their inner states completely stabilized. Heavenly Wolf Howling Moon. The wolf cub howled and summoned a magnificent diagram that instantly killed a demon beast that appeared on verge of stepping into the legendary realm. The wolf cub, then, devoured the demon core of that demon beast, and almost immediately, he was surrounded by intermittent waves of terrifying breath. His hair inverted as he stood still while surrounded by his own aura raging wantonly. He plans to challenge the heavenly tribulation. Yemo shouted. His breath began to boil up, rolling away in all directions. In the sky, layer after layer of dark clouds started to build up. This was a spectacular scene of the instantaneous formation of heavenly tribulation. It appeared like the wolf cub was planning to have a breakthrough from half-step legendary realm to half-step legendary fifth stage. This heavenly tribulation was the great test that must be cleared at all costs. Not to mention, there was no option of backing out. Yi Shiwen hastily said, "Hurry up and get away from us." Yi Shiwen didn't want to receive accidental injuries while messing with a heavenly tribulation, especially with the one that was going to test a freak like Wolf Cub. Although this heavenly tribulation had not manifested completely, Yi Shiwen could still sense its terrifying coercion. Moreover, this time the Wolf Cub was already at half-step legendary realm, so the heavenly tribulation would be calibrated accordingly to test him. Yi Shiwen couldn't imagine the extent of its destructive power, but it was enough to make his scalp tingle a bit. The wolf cub quickly went far away, and at this moment, a rain of raging lightning strikes began to aim at him. His black furry body was immediately struck by thunderbolts one after another. Soon the air was filled with burning smell. The wolf cub started hopping around to dodge the thunderbolts. Yi Shiwen and the Emo siblings were standing afar and observing this magnificent spectacle. They were not planning to help the wolf cub. At this time, several tyrannical soul searches swept out of nowhere. They turned out to be coming from the older generation experts of the legendary realm. They must have sensed the heavenly tribulation and sent their soul searches. It seemed like they were aiming to attack Yi Shiwen and his team while they were at their weakest since one of the team members was undergoing breakthrough. Yi Shiwen sent his soul search to intercept the incoming ones. Who'd be so courageous to challenge him? Had they not seen him kill 3 powerhouses of older generation within moments? It seemed like some people were still coveting to take down Yi Shiwen. After all, he was one of the top players of the younger generation and was operating on his own, without the backing of any major influence. If they managed to kill him, then they might seize various treasures that he must have accumulated during his adventures. The very thought of seizing those treasures from the corpse of Yi Shiwen must be exciting them to no extent. Among those who were considered the top players of the younger generation, several members of the Army of God, the Genie Young Master, the 7 Star Lords etc. were considered untouchable because of their strong backings. The expert in black robe was the first to go in but was nowhere to be seen. There was no news about him in the past few days, as if he didn't exist in general. Similarly, the Destruction Army was backed by the 7 Star Lords and hence must not be provoked. In the end, the older experts must have decided that their best and easiest option was to target a lone powerhouse like Yi Shiwen. It seems like I haven't killed enough to prove my point, Yi Shiwen said with a sigh. Ha ha ha, kill them all, kill as many as you can, Yi Emo said while laughing like a madman. After all, those killed by Yi Shiwen would transform into blood fog, and their flesh and blood would be absorbed by Tianyuan Mirror. The more he would kill, the faster would be the restoration of Tianyuan Mirror. You wait here. I will go get rid of some annoying flies, Yi Shiwen said. Emo siblings nodded. Even they had sensed arrogance in those soul searches. Yi Shiwen, carrying a long blade, instantly turned into a golden beam of light and sped towards the distant place, precisely toward the hideout of those masters. Chapter 307, Half-Step Legendary Realms. First stage. Yi Shiwen was treading on a rainbow, marching across the void while raising the long blade in his hands. In a blink of an eye, he arrived in front of a warrior. Yi Shiwen, what do you think you are doing? That warrior saw Yi Shiwen suddenly appearing in front of his face, and a trace of fear abruptly appeared on his face. After all, they were already discussing about joining forces to take down Yi Shiwen. This proved the point that Yi Shiwen was a terrifying existence, and they were really not sure if they could deal with him on their own. Hence, they planned to join forces against him. Otherwise, who would be willing to share Yi Shiwen's treasures with others? You are overreaching yourselves, Yi Shiwen sneered, thinking that these people really wanted to gang up on him. Shua! The long blade in Yi Ziwen's hand suddenly exploded and released terrifying rays of light. Without enough time to respond, a touch of bloodstain appeared on that warrior's nape, and almost at the same time, his body went sluggish all of a sudden, which was visible to the naked eye. His blood and essence condensed into a stream of scarlet blood and merged with Yi Ziwen's body, further getting absorbed by the Tianyuan mirror the very next instant. After having absorbed the fine essence and blood of a legendary expert, the Tianyuan mirror burst into waves of carnage immediately. The outline of Yi Ziwen's figure resembled that of a blood god that seemed to have arrived from the ancient times to slaughter all. Pitiful screams came from the distance as the experts of Legendary Realm were getting killed by Yi Shiwen one by one. The Mo siblings were speechless and looking at each other with empty expressions on their faces. They couldn't help but realize that Yi Shiwen was really a sinister person, and fairly decisive in performing such tasks. He truly was a big shot with great persona. Being a big shot wasn't something that commanded one to not act personally. Rather, it made sure that one would certainly not let off an enemy no matter what. In a life-and-death situation, rage and decisive killing was a must. It wasn't like the Mo brother and sister were soft-hearted people. Since the day they set foot on this road, the gathering of a variety of talented geniuses had made their existence comparable to that of an ant's. Not to mention they were also hunted down at multiple occasions. They also gazed at the heavenly tribulation that had encircled the wolf cub, and suddenly felt like even those around Yi Shiwen were not normal. The wolf cub's heavenly tribulation was getting increasingly terrifying with passing time. If it was them surrounded by that kind of heavenly tribulation, they would have long been hacked to death. But this wolf cub, although shrieking and howling wildly, was constantly jumping around and bravely facing the vicious attacks. There was no sign of injuries on his body, nor was there any significant damage done to his vitality and basic strength. At this time, the wolf cub was struck by a thunderbolt, and it seemed like he was dead. The whole heavenly tribulation suddenly started raging, and began to boil with excitement. A section of lightning crossed down from the sky, and started condensing into wolves one after another. All of those lightning figures appeared like wolves of half-step Legendary Realm, with their wolf king standing at the back. Not to mention, the Wolf King was at the peak of half-step Legendary Realm's first stage. Several ice-cold eyes were staring intently at the wolf cub. In a chorus of loud howls, hundreds of lightning wolves sprang toward the wolf cub at once. These wolves were all at the same level as the wolf cub, and were unusually horrifying. Mo siblings were immediately amazed by this scene. Everyone knows the fact that incredible experts have to go through much more terrifying heavenly tribulation during breakthrough. Since this tribulation was getting even more terrifying, it was quite easy to figure out that it was abnormal. Even a demon beast powerhouse would fail to survive this level of heavenly tribulation. Therefore, one could say that this ordinary-looking wolf cub definitely had an extraordinary origin, and perhaps was of noble descent. The wolf cub roared and rushed forward, crashing into the pack of lightning wolves and tangling together. Initially, it seemed like an easy task for the wolf cub, but at this time, it might actually turn into an exceptional bloody battle. A lightning wolf bit the wolf cub and directly ripped off a piece of flesh from his body. He was immediately in pain and yelled out loud. He instantly turned around and swallowed that lightning wolf in one go. Huge amount of lightning energy contained in that lightning wolf's body was instantly absorbed by the wolf cub into his body, immediately raising his spiritual value a little. It was hard to tell for how long this battle continued, but finally, those lightning wolves were wiped out by the wolf cub. However, the real trouble had only just arrived as the most powerful lightning wolf, the Wolf King, suddenly flew toward the wolf cub while howling loudly and then nipped at him. After absorbing a lot of lightning wolves, the wolf cub's stature now exceeded more than 2 meters, equally matched with that lightning wolf king. The two great wolves started attacking each other in the sky. This was truly a tragic battle. The wolf cub was bleeding heavily with no way to stop the blood loss. Large chunks of his flesh were torn apart, with bits of flesh and blood falling down from the sky. The frigid praying that happened just now made the world change its color. The Mo sibling had their complexions changed as a result of witnessing this battle firsthand. It was such a tragic heavenly tribulation that they would definitely have failed to pass, but the wolf cub was still fighting. Then, abruptly, a flash of rainbow-colored light dazzled the sky. Yi Shiwen, carrying a long blade in his hand, was treading the rainbow. His body was covered with stains of blood all over and brimming with murderous aura. In a split second, he killed a lot of legendary experts. Yi Shiwen said nothing but looked at the wolf cub from afar. He could tell that the wolf cub's fight was in its last act. The muscles on his chest were gnawed off while the lightning wolf king had half of its head bitten off. A normal demon beast would have died as a result of that, but it was made up of pure energy, and all it needed was to restore itself to its original form. Yi Shiwen was relieved when at last, the wolf cub discharged a divine beam directly toward the lightning wolf king, and hacked it into pieces before ultimately absorbing its entire energy the very next instant. The wolf cub successfully crossed the entirety of heavenly tribulation, and his body suddenly started falling down from the sky. Yi Shiwen and the Mo sibling quickly rushed toward him to check on his condition. "Gee, I did not expect you to actually have such a tribulation," Yi Shiwen said with admiration and amazement. "You should try as well." The wolf cub cast a weak gaze at Yi Shiwen, as if having no strength left to lift his eyelids. But at this time, everyone noticed that the clouds of heavenly tribulation did not disperse. On the contrary, they grew denser and denser. "Crap. Just now, I spent all my strength to cross the heavenly tribulation. What is going on?" The wolf cub suddenly cursed out loud. "This is mine," Yi Shiwen said as he looked up and gazed at the raging cloud. He could feel the heavenly tribulation firmly locking on at him, making it impossible for him to escape. He could tell that if he tried to leave that spot, the heavenly tribulation would shoot him down. Mo siblings quickly took the wolf cub got away from Yi Shiwen. When the wolf cub's heavenly tribulation was that terrifying, then Yi Shiwen's was definitely going to be unimaginably insane. Your killing intention had affected the heavenly tribulation, and that is why it had not yet dispersed, rather it is coming down together with your heavenly tribulation. Yi Mo said. The heavenly tribulation didn't target the experts randomly. It usually targeted those with exceptional murderous aura, or those who offended the heavens and then tried to reason. But today, this didn't happen because of Yi Shiwen's murderous aura. First, the wolf cub's heavenly tribulation had not left, and secondly, the cultivation of Yi Shiwen was at such an advanced level that the heavenly tribulation was going to appear for him sooner or later. In the sky, the clouds were darkening and getting denser and denser with electric snakes shuttling back and forth inside those clouds. Voila! Along with a shrill noise, hundreds of electric snakes swooped down from the clouds, outdoing one another while falling towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was entirely still but continuously improving his martial skill. His gilded tyrant form was going berserk and exuding rays of golden light in all directions, giving rise to the golden swords that were slashing the electric snakes. Boom, boom, boom. Intermittent and fierce explosions occurred right above Yi Shiwen. Violent storm waves formed by the explosions mingled with the electrical sparks and swept everywhere, engulfing anything in the path and wreaking havoc. After the divinities on Yi Shiwen's body transformed into golden swords, and were cutting through the raid of electrical energy, Yi Shiwen's gilded body was absorbing that energy constantly and evolving. Such a heavenly tribulation was a nightmare for an ordinary genius of legendary realm. But it was nothing for Yi Shiwen. His gilded tyrant form rushed to the fourth layer, and the durability of his body reached unimaginable proportions. Crash bang! At that moment, bolts of lightning crashed from the clouds like the torrential downpour, all the way toward and upon Yi Shiwen. Bang! 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 The heavenly lightning was getting more and more intense. Its power was also growing gradually, getting stronger and stronger, enough to drown Yi Shiwen in a sea of lightning. The Mo brother and sister were stunned by seeing such a crazy tribulation, and that too much more aggressive than that of the wolf cub, almost to the point of exaggeration. Really, just what kind of pet was this wolf cub? And what kind of owner was Yi Shiwen? Such an inconceivable pair was truly mind-boggling. The heavenly tribulation continued to test Yi Shiwen, and could do nothing to him. Gradually, the lightning strikes also stopped, But Yi Shiwen was not yet relaxed because he knew that the heavenly tribulation was still not gone. Sure enough, and as expected, a lightning bolt transformed into a long spear and struck down with a loud rumbling sound. Yi Shiwen immediately raised his hand to block while shooting his other palm toward the incoming lightning spear. Boom! With an extremely dreadful explosion, the lightning spear set off a lightning storm and started to wreak havoc. Yi Ziwen's hand was now covered in blood, which happened as a result of the lightning storm set off by the lightning spear. The impact shook his body completely and almost cracked his bones. Yi Shiwen was suddenly vigilant, as this was the first time he was injured while crossing a heavenly tribulation. He immediately activated the Phoenix regeneration and healed the wound on his hand. However, the heavenly tribulation clouds were still roaring in the sky, and 3 lightning spears appeared at once. Boom! 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 Yi Shiwen was rocking his golden divine clothes as he bravely received those 3 lightning spears on his body, which tore open his flesh but was soon repaired by Phoenix regeneration in a flash. These lightning spears were really nasty, as they were so fast that there was no way to dodge them. Yi Shiwen would take them on each time, and his body would be covered in blood as a result. But he continued to absorb these lightning spears into his body, and slowly, his wounds grew smaller in size and fewer in number. Eventually, those lightning spears no longer posed any threat to his gilded tyrant form, as it had become much more formidable than earlier after nourishment. Finally, it seemed like the heavenly tribulation didn't have the means to continue any longer, and resigned in the end, of course, quite unwillingly. As soon as it ended, Yi Ziwen's body suddenly began to emit waves of intermittent golden light. After having passed through the baptism of this heavenly tribulation, his tyrant body technique had reveled great benefits in the form of the enormous progress that came as the byproduct of all this. Yi Ziwen's breath also began to have an unceasing breakthrough, bit by bit approaching the first stage of half-step legendary realm. The so-called half-step legendary realm's first stage required an absolute accumulation of energy prior to the breakthrough, which was naturally extremely difficult to achieve. Boom! A burst of energy swept out of Yi Ziwen's body all at once. And finally, he stepped into half-step legendary realm's first stage. Chapter 308. Dragon Essence appears. The time was crawling away slowly until half a month had already passed. At the end of it, Yi Shiwen completely consolidated the inner state of his cultivation while wantonly slaughtering demon beasts that happened to appear in his path, and absorbed the essence from the demon cores, etc. Ultimately, his cultivation fully consolidated at the peak of half-step legendary realm's first stage. With all sorts of secret technique in his arsenal, he was confident enough to sweep away any and all experts of half-step legendary realm's second stage quite effortlessly. In fact, he was confident that he might even be able to contend with the weaker experts of half-step legendary realm's third stage. Excluding a dab hand like Yi Shiwen, even the wolf cub was at half-step legendary realm's first stage, and could easily contend with experts of half-step legendary realm's second stage. In addition to that, the Mo siblings also benefited a lot in the past half-a-month period, experiencing an enormous promotion in their strengths, and also obtained the remains of various heavenly treasures, etc. Before long, they were also able to reach the first stage of half-step legendary realm. Such a tyrannical team would be considered extremely powerful in the entire domain of Wang Heavenly Faction. In short, this team was so formidable that one could not find an opponent for them in the vicinity. Neither did anyone try to mess with them or appear anywhere nearby. Soon, the name and fame of Yi Shiwen and the others rushed out and spread throughout the ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction. Yi Shiwen rushed all the way toward the central regions of this small world because he didn't his team to advance too far away from their destination. After all, if their team happened to encounter a group of powerful demon beasts, there was no way they would be able to escape that easily. The best course of action was to maintain unceasing slaughtering and keep moving forward all the way toward the destination. Boom! Yi Shiwen shot his fist and blasted away a group of uncanny and grotesque-looking demon beasts of some unknown species. This is totally unreasonable. These spiritual arteries have almost dried up. What on earth are these demon beasts relying on for a living? The wolf cub said in his usual foul-mouthed manner. Although they were decisively and mercilessly killing their way toward the destination, and continued on the killing spree for half a month. Enough to make anyone throw up out of disgust, but they weren't homicidal enough to not realize the condition those beasts were in. Seems like a desperate attempt by these high-level spiritual arteries to show filial piety to the living beings of this world. Perhaps this world's last resort to return the favor to its residents. Yi Shiwen said, similar to how some people experience a dying flash when they miraculously gain heightened consciousness right before dying, this world's spiritual arteries are acting up frantically at the end of its lifespan, trying to return the favor while simultaneously speeding up the demise of this world in the process. Yi Shiwen had already asked about all this from Emo, an old monster that had lived for God knows how many years, following the Demon King for all those years, and of course he had seen it all. The very extent of his wisdom was non-quantifiable, not to mention there were only a few real secrets that didn't come under his domain of knowledge. Now they were entering the observation region of the ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction, and finally experienced the true madness of the ruins. At this stage, the spiritual arteries started acting crazily, spewing Ling Qi everywhere, and thereby causing a sudden increase in the numbers of demon beast. The more they ventured into the depths, the more warriors they encountered en route, all rushing in one direction. The reason was very simple. There were reports of discovering a valley where the dragon essence was supposedly laid out. The news immediately caused numerous experts go crazy. Didn't they come to this small world for the dragon essence? Everyone had come here for the dragon essence. After a long time, they finally got the accurate news, and it contained something peculiar that was bound to make people excited. There were reports about an approximately 50 to 60 meters tall black Jiaolong. It was not an adult yet, but already very terrifying with its black scale glowing breathtakingly, and making it look like a mountain in general. Its mustaches were constantly moving up and down quite vigorously, suffused with horrifying breath, dreadful enough to make a human tremble in fear. Its whole body was shrouded in fog that was being churned by electrical sparks. Right beneath that flood dragon was the corpse of a long dragon. The experts were looking intently at this strange scene, and suddenly understood that the dragon essence actually took birth after the death of a dragon. They were quite surprised to see the dragon essence that appeared just like a real dragon, but it was covered with a mat of dragon corpse. However, unlike an ordinary corpse, it contained an aggressive vigor. Dragons were considered praiseworthy creatures throughout the world and inherently carried a very scary coercion, known as Longwei. No wonder it remained in the corpse even after death. More and more experts rushed to this spot. Genie Young Master, the fifth god, and the other powerhouses had already arrived, but this time they did not have the thoughts of infighting. Everyone's focus was centered on this incomparably huge flood dragon. They were aware of the fact that this flood dragon must be killed first, otherwise, it would be impossible to encroach on the dragon essence lying beneath it. This flood dragon should have been born not many months ago. He is still in infancy. Emo said, normally, a flood dragon is born in the legendary realm, grows in the sage realm, and by the time it's fully grown up, it will have at least reached the great sage level, and this is absolute for all flood dragons. This flood dragon has already reached the peak of legendary 3rd stage, and should be having a breakthrough to legendary 4th stage any time now. The more powerful is a demon beast, the more difficult it finds growing up, especially for an inborn demon beast like this one. Emo further explained. Usually a flood dragon's childhood stretches for hundreds of years, however. This young dragon was born not long ago and was still able to break through to such an extent. I think this is somehow related to the absorption of dragon essence. Yi Shiwen and the Mo siblings were dumbstruck when they heard the explanation. A real flood dragon would absolutely reach the great sage level once it was all grown up? This was simply unheard of. Just how terrifying was the dragon race? But while this flood dragon was just an infant, it already had all it would take to deter even the most formidable human experts present on the scene. Even Yi Shiwen might not be able to deal with this dragon, but the experts did not want to give up this opportunity. They finally managed to find the dragon essence. How could they just let it go? They could tell that this floor dragon was about to step into legendary 4th stage. And if that happened, no one would be able to face it. As long as it was sitting on top of the dragon essence, its rate of progress was definitely going to be faster. They certainly knew about the dragon essence enough to have figured out this problem. By that time, they would have no chance to snatch the dragon essence away from the flood dragon. Even now, it was very difficult, but if they let it be like that for any longer, then it would become impossible later on. Moreover, they already noticed that the flood dragon was enraged after being encircled by human experts. Although the flood dragon was unable to speak, its tyrannical soul perception swept over and properly relayed its anger to everyone. Moreover, allowing this flood dragon to grow any stronger wasn't going to be beneficial to them in any way. It seems like not much time has passed since the hatching of this flood dragon's egg. I do not know from where Wang Heavenly Faction found a dragon egg. Since the world has changed, even a hybrid dragon is hard to find, let alone a legitimate true blood dragon. Yemo said, "My estimate is that this flood dragon's egg must have stayed on the dragon essence for a long time before hatching, probably after the completely decline of Wang Heavenly Faction." Humans, damn it. The angry young flood dragon roared, and its several 100 feet long body soared high in the sky instantly like a mountain, and flew towards human experts nearby. The noise from terrifying explosions broke out immediately and submerged the space itself. The flood dragon's impact was in direction of the army of God. They were the first group to arrive and had initiated the attack once but did not succeed. But now, the flood dragon was vengeful and immediately rushed toward the crowd of the army of God. Although it hadn't been long since the flood dragon hatched out of its egg, its body was huge. It gave out a long and loud cry and releases a type of fluctuating coercion in all directions that swept out, chipping the space just like mighty ocean waves. Bang, bang, bang. Those members of the army of God that were above half-step legendary realm managed to save their lives, but those below that had their bodies fragmented into pieces by the shock waves. Humph! The fifth god rushed forward with his long halberd like a god from ancient times. The long halberd directly punctured into the body of the flood dragon. Boom! Ripples of horrifying energy waves were set off everywhere, crazily disintegrating anything in the path. The fifth god immediately repositioned himself and directly stabbed the black flood dragon between the eyebrows with his halberd, setting off a storm of rogue energy waves. A scale that was about half a meter in size was instantly chipped off, but the flood dragon immediately used its tyrannical power to send out shock waves, shaking off the halberd in the process. Poof! The fifth god spouted a mouthful of blood and was sent flying dozens of meters away. At that very instant, the flood dragon faced forward and immediately rushed to grab the fifth god's flying body in midair. Several experts were watching this from the sidelines and immediately held their breaths as they realized that this young flood dragon was extremely scary. They couldn't help but engage themselves in introspection, thinking whether they could really face such a creature. Many reached the conclusion that it was meaningless to even think about facing this flood dragon as they feared losing their lives by the shockwaves itself. Facing it head-on was simply out of the question. Listen everyone, no matter how we do it, we must kill this beast. At this time, the patron saint of Yangon City spoke. I hope we are able to work together this time, otherwise, no one will be able to reap benefits, but there's a possibility of hope if we manage to slay this beast. The experts nodded in agreement all at once. Yes, he is right. We must slay this young flood dragon no matter what. Indeed, it must be slain at any cost. Many people confessed that they couldn't obtain the dragon essence anymore, as they were coveting the young flood dragon in their hearts. Regardless of its age, it was still a dragon with the blood of a real dragon lord flowing in its veins. It was said that in this world, only the race of gods could contend with this so-called race of terror, the dragon race. So I guess he reaches legendary realm, and can finally start kicking some ass, right? Actually, he's stabilizing his cultivation in the 9th level. Maybe after finishing the rest of the library? He's afraid that he can't handle the half-step legendary book demons. The MC conveniently turned chicken shit at just the right moment, huh? Considering he's strong against demons, and have been dismembered on multiple occasions for the sake of leveling. You're probably right. So when will he reach legendary realm? He will probably need to reach peak 9th level first. Right. Then there's this true complete thing. Huh. Then this half-step legendary thing that the writer will probably retcon into a realm. So, When will he reach the goddamned legendary realm? There are more than 3,000 chapters left, you know. Chapter 309, Flood Dragon slaughtered. If they could obtain even a small part of its body, then to them, it would be like the supreme and most precious treasure. Yi Shiwen, come on, kill this baby flood dragon, and make it a blood sacrifice for your poisonous dragon water control flag array. Doing that will upgrade its power by multiple levels, and might help in fully achieving the legendary level. Yi Mo said excitedly as the flag array took deepwater black serpents as sacrifices in order to establish the foundation of its enhancement. And both the dragons and snakes belonged to the same dragon species, but contained a major difference in their basic power levels. There simply was no comparison between a pure-blood flood dragon and a deepwater black serpent. If poisonous dragon water control flag was nourished with a young flood dragon's blood, the level of its power was bound to rise dramatically. Young flood dragon and dragon essence both are mine. Yi Shiwen made up his mind, but in order to obtain them, he must defeat those extremely high-handed top players of the younger generation and the older generation. Yi Shiwen had already made up his mind, was prepared to face all those people in front of him. He wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone. Not even the god or the Buddha would escape his wrath if they were to stand between him and his goal. The old patron saint's words had made it quite apparent to everyone a while ago that in order to obtain the dragon essence, it was necessary to first get rid of the flood dragon. Humph! The first one to attack was the Jin Young Master of Genie Guards. He took out a huge fan, and suddenly out of nowhere, a giant sierra smashed down upon Flood Dragon's body. The impact directly crushed some of the dragon's scales, making it roar again and again in pain. This was called Shanhashan. This class of magical weapons had many such weapons, but Jin Young Masters might add it to its own. And with each movement of the fan, the mountains and rivers slammed down one after another directly upon the flood dragon without giving it any respite. However, this flood dragon was really very fearful, and it seemed like it did not have any declining tendency. Instead, it continued its frenzy all the while. At this time, the black-robed powerhouse launched a powerful strike, releasing a rippling sword key that rushed out horizontally and cut into the flood dragon's body. And the old patron saint finally went into action as well, and called forth a massive handprint that fell down from the sky. The members of Destruction Army also jumped into the battle, filling the entire sky with their murderous aura. This was like the reincarnation of a killing star. Not to mention it seriously took big enough courage in one's heart to rush into a face-to-face battle with this flood dragon. Yi Shiwen was also unwilling to be outdone by them. In his hand appeared a heavenly golden sword, intention burning crazily, and then shot up high into the sky. The world changed color, and everyone was impressed by Yi Shiwen at this instant. One must know that although sword intention and sword qi had only a mismatch of one word, but the two were not the same thing in any way. Just like Zhen Yuan and sword qi were in itself different from each other. One was just a scattered form of energy while the other had a condensed form, and was also shape-specific. The so-called sword intention was an artistic conception, an idea condition of a sword technique that could be congealed anytime after having comprehended the same earlier. So, there was an absolute need for an expert to comprehend their sword skills to as far as they could go until reaching the epitome of sword arts. Although the black-robed powerhouse's rippling sword key was strong, it was still only sword key. Many people saw the sword intention in Yi Ziwen's hand, and were immediately vigilant of him. This Yi Shiwen was certainly not an ordinary expert, but they actually did not know that he could congeal sword intention because he learned it from watching a tyrannical old sword master use the same attack. That sword master's sword skills were really out of this world. Yi Shiwen had managed to just deconstruct a part of the ideal condition he saw back then to be able to achieve his current sword intention attack. Regarding uniting a part of the soul into the sword intention was simply not possible for Yi Shiwen to achieve at his current level. In fact, he did not even know the level requirement for that type of accomplishment. Yi Ziwen's sword intention penetrated straight through tough dragon scales, further penetrating into its flesh. This caused its blood to splash out as it roared out uncomfortably in pain. Yi Shiwen managed to score one effective attack against this dragon, and open the first wound on its body. The experts saw Yi Shiwen in action and finally understood that even though this dragon was very difficult to deal with, it was not impossible to slay it. In fact, even if they were individually not its opponent but by joining forces, they could still cherish the hope of making this dragon learn the meaning of pain and hatred. Suddenly everyone was greatly encouraged, and with a boosted morale, they bellowed and rushed toward the dragon in abundance. Roar! The flood dragon received a barrage of attacks from several experts, including the top players of the younger generation. It suddenly started roaring, and its roars were so tyrannical that it seemed as if space itself would collapse. The earth was moving and a cluster of dark clouds had started to gather up in the sky. Within the thick layers of dense clouds, one could see the shadow of a seemingly endless thunder dragon seething with excitement. According to the legend, the dragons had the ability to control the forces of nature, and a flood dragon would do well in the department of water manipulation and weather control. With the world's imperial symbol, a flood dragon had a considerable amount of abilities that were attributed to the mythical dragons mentioned in the fables. In a blink of an eye, heavy rain started pouring down in the form of torrential rains while each and every drop turned into ice and hailed upon the experts. Numerous electric dragons were lurking in the clouds and penetrating through the layers of ice to strike the people underneath. This flood dragon's magical powers were just ridiculously strong. These hailstones and electric dragons were aiming for the experts and hacking them down relentlessly, but Yi Shiwen simply disregarded them entirely. Tianyuan mirror was floating above his head and protecting him from those attacks. Not even a hint of these attacks was able to reach his body. In fact, before crossing the heavenly tribulation, he might have been worried about such a large-scale attack, but right now, they did not pose any threat to him. Clang! Yi Shiwen immediately issued the sword intention attack, which instantly burst into a terrifying golden beam of sword light and directly crashed into the flood dragon's scales. The mind-blowing explosion set off raging tides of boundless energy in all direction. Kaka! The scales within a radius of several meters couldn't sustain the impact of Yi Shiwen's sword intention and instantly disintegrated, turning into powder, followed by the sword intention condensing into a long sword and piercing all the way into the flesh of the flood dragon. Poochie! The flood dragon's blood spattered out like a fountain of water. Yi Shiwen's body immediately released a golden light that went forth, enclosed the young dragon's blood, and brought it back to be absorbed by the poisonous dragon water control flag. Almost in an instant, the flag array shook vigorously and horrifying rays of light exploded out of it. The greeting from dragon blood had such a reaction, and Yi Shiwen barely managed to stop the souls of deep-water black serpents from flying out of the flag array. It seemed like they were really excited and all set to make trouble. Fortunately, he quickly pinned them down inside the flag array and stopped them from popping out. Haha, this is really useful, Yi Shiwen. The metaphysics of this baby flood dragon is absolutely useful for the evolution of poisonous dragon water control flag array. Yi Mo said with a smile. This baby dragon comes from the true blood species of dragons, and is certainly not like that deep-water black serpent king who was going to transform into a flood dragon after stepping into the legendary realm. This baby flood dragon has such a large body, and has the blood of a true dragon flowing in its veins. Its blood and essence should be more than enough to make all your deep-water black serpents evolve into legendary-level flood dragons. And Yi Shiwen nodded. The flood dragon felt an intense piercing pain, and immediately moved its sierra-like tail across the expansive sky, pumping out whistling winds everywhere. The fast-moving tail left behind a vacuum in its path, and the experts that were planning the siege from behind had no time to escape. They lost their lives in a flash. The display of such inhuman force scared off several experts who pulled out immediately after witnessing the death of several of their own. Yi Shiwen also did not dare to be negligent. Although this was only a young flood dragon that was at the peak of legendary 3rd stage, but considering its origins, its powerful body and inexplicable magical powers, it could easily contend with the experts of legendary 4th stage. Yi Shiwen moved his footsteps and his body was wrapped in golden clothes, along with a pair of devil wings appearing behind him. In a blink of an eye, he disappeared from the spot in a golden flash of light and appeared several meters away, avoiding the flood dragon's attack quite effortlessly. Even if this young flood dragon was under large-scale siege, Its terror was still incomparable. However, almost immediately, others immediately filled the lacking position of Yi Shiwen in the fight, and engaged the dragon. Right now, not everyone wanted to fight with the dragon, but if they did not kill it now, then they were probably going to die. This was a you die or I die kind of battle, and everyone was putting their lives on the line at the moment. Without a hint of hesitation, Yi Shiwen immediately reinvested himself into the battle once again, and started attacking the young flood dragon. It seemed as if everyone had gone crazy, whether it was for the young flood dragon or the dragon essence. Their bloodshot eyes were fixated on their targets, and in any event, the young flood dragon was a common obstacle for all, a barrier that needed to be eradicated at the earliest. This flood dragon was surrounded by a huge crowd of experts and miserably battered, had no way to break out of the tight encirclement, and each time it tried to break out, that resulted in the death of an expert. It was a peerless yet ominous beast, extremely terrifying. However, even though this flood dragon was very powerful, it still couldn't contend with so many of top-tier powerhouses, including an expert like Yi Shiwen who would be considered outstanding among human experts. There were many top players of the younger generation with each having their own inheritance of terror, and at this time, all of them joined forces to take down that young flood dragon. Its power began exhaust slowly, and there were patches of blood stains all over its body. It was losing more and more blood, and one of its legs was almost cut down by that black-robed mysterious powerhouse. The young flood dragon was gasping heavily like an ox, and both of its eyes were red. At this time, everyone was kind of happy in their heart as they knew that this baby dragon had reached its exhausted state, and was only drawing its last breaths. Boom! Yi Shiwen summoned the Han seal that transformed into a huge mountain range, and directly smashed down upon the flood dragon with the contained force of hundreds of millions of units. The flood dragon couldn't resist the impact, and was directly pounded onto the ground. The flood dragon opened its big mouth and spouted pure dragon blood. Die. After shooting a shaking sword intention up into the sky, Yi Shiwen opened the devil wings behind his back, and immediately flew towards the flood dragon. He arrived right above the dragon's head. A sword intention instantly blossomed in a flash with a burst of wind, and was issued toward the young dragon's head. The collision left the scales on its head in a completely shattered state. Boom! With the loud sound of an explosion, the sword intention in Yi Shiwen's hand had pierced the flood dragon's head. Dash. Chapter 310 Battle with the Fifth God. The young flood dragon's body started twitching frantically as its entire brain was churned and minced by Yi Shiwen's sword intention attack. Even its soul was annihilated in the process. It finally stopped moving anymore and left this world. This dragon essence belongs to the army of God. Encircle it. The fifth god shouted loudly, and just like a thoroughly rehearsed army answering to a great general's command, the army of God huddled in a fence around the dragon essence. The fifth god's figure rushed forward like a fine strand of rainbow light in the sky, instantly toward the dragon essence to take it in his grasp. The dragon essence belongs to this old man. The old patron saint sneered and immediately broke through the encirclement of the army of God. He sent many of the army members flying, while several of them had their bones directly crushed. They just couldn't stop the old patron saint, and those who actually tried lost their lives. Boom! A big hand made its way toward the dragon essence to seize it. You dare to snatch my dragon essence? The fifth god thundered angrily. The long halberd in his hands sparkled all of a sudden, and released bright rays of light that resembled stars in the night sky. Just like a wicked dragon, it immediately flew toward the old man's big hand to block it. His cultivation had recently reached the second stage of half-step legendary realm, and the resulting outcome of that was completely apparent to all. His tyrannical power caused the space in front of him to collapse, disintegrating into the chaos on the other side. Bang! With a loud noise that sounded like the collision between gold and iron, the long halberd tore its way into the big hand, making huge amounts of lingqi to leak out crazily and overflow everywhere. A startling rainbow-colored sky sword flashed in the sky. The black-robed powerhouse was attempting to nab the dragon essence like every other powerhouse on the scene. Humph! Jin Young Master also rushed in, and unleashed the wrath of the fan of mountains and rivers. Several hidden experts of the older generation, with many having a profound cultivation of legendary second stage, also rushed over to snatch the dragon essence. In fact, some of them had deeper cultivation than that of Humaniang Gadao. Also, there were many people who knew that they didn't have a chance to obtain the dragon essence. Instead, they were interested in seizing the young flood dragon's corpse. They suddenly rushed toward the dragon corpse, but were startled to find a figure approaching faster. All of a sudden, a huge golden hand congealed out of nowhere and grasped that flood dragon's corpse in one go. Yes, it was Yi Zaiwenho successfully captured the dragon corpse. He tactically chose to go after the dragon corpse before dragon essence because with so many top players in the battlefield, competing over dragon essence, it was certainly going to take a long time to reach the final outcome, so might as well just go for the dragon corpse now and join the fray later on, preferably in its last phase. Right after the young flood dragon's corpse was received into the Tianyuan mirror, it immediately began to dismember the huge and extract massive amounts of its essence to be fed to the poisonous dragon water control flag. Listen everyone, let's kill Yi Zaiwen and recapture the young flood dragon's corpse. At this time, an expert mustered his strength and raised his voice from the crowd without knowing whether he would be successful in provoking the crowd's mood against Yishiwen. Yes, Yishiwen, you alone cannot keep an entire dragon corpse. You're just being too greedy. A warrior said indignantly. I was the first to snatch it, so naturally it is mine. What did you all expect? I killed the dragon, hence I get to keep its corpse. Yi Zaiwen smiled coldly as he said that. The young dragon's corpse was of great significance to him, like hell he would hand it over to anyone. They would have to give up the idea altogether. Come on, let's kill him already. Just think, not only can we recapture the young flood dragon's corpse from him, but can also get his secret treasures. Henceforth, everything will go soaring up for us. A sharp voice sounded from the crowd, but no one knew who proposed that. However, even before his voice fell, Yi Zaiwen snorted and a shaking sword kick condensed high up in the sky and fell down upon the crowd of experts. Boom! The target of the sword ki attack was an expert, who was at the first stage of half-step legendary realm, and right now was hidden in the crowd. However, he still couldn't prevent his body from getting penetrated by the sword ki as it nailed him directly to the ground. Have the ability and guts to stand up and say it to my face. Yi Zaiwen clamored in a calm yet cold voice. He was paying attention to the source of the voice that was trying to stir up the crowd against Yishiwen. Of course, if all these people were instigated to attack Yi Zaiwen, then the situation might go out of hand. The people were speechless, looking at each other, not sure about what just happened. A moment ago, someone said something from the crowd, but no one expected that he would be killed by Yi Zaiwen so promptly. Some experts recognized that he was an expert with the cultivation level of half-step legendary realm's first stage, and could be counted among the strongest experts present in the crowd, but even so, he was crucified by Yi Zaiwen's sword. Yi Zaiwen's power had simply gone beyond their imagination. They were not stupid and just did not know how they got incited a moment ago into thinking that they could take down Yishiwen. But now they were also saving their thoughts. The so-called law does not punish numerous offenders. If everyone joined forces and together attacked Yi Zaiwen, then there might have been a chance of forcing Yi Zaiwen to hand over the dragon corpse. However, it took Yi Zaiwen just one sword strike to cut down all their thoughts and intentions. When an expert of half-step legendary first stage didn't stand a chance against Yi Zaiwen and his sword, there was no way someone else would dare to rush toward the absolute demise. The crowd was neither moving forward nor was it retreating. Everyone wanted to have one person to take the lead, but no one wanted to be that leader. No one was willing to stand out and challenge the possibility of taking the fall for all. The fate of that previous warrior was for all to see. Indeed, Yi Zaiwen might not be able to kill them all, but he would certainly kill off all the leading ones quite effortlessly. Fortunately, the status quo between them and Yi Zaiwen didn't go for long, and before it might take a turn for the worse, all of a sudden, from the side of the battlefield where contention over the dragon essence was going on, a big golden hand rose up, blotting out the sky, and went toward Yishiwen. Humph Yishiwen! The fifth god roared, holding his halberd upright. He rushed across the expansive sky, all the way toward Yishiwen. Each of his steps was opening void in the space. Wild magical power was surging everywhere. People who watched this felt as if they were looking at the reincarnation of some ancient god. He was just too fast. Almost instantaneously, he arrived in front of Yishiwen, pulling a long shadow behind him. His golden-colored Zhenyuan was surging and boiling around him. His power level was also seething and had already reached the peak. His presence truly resembled that of a brave general. "Yishiwen, time to die," said the fifth god in an ice-cold voice, and it seemed as if the halberd in his hands was about to break the world itself, bringing about the rebirth of chaos in this world as it punctured forward to stab Yishiwen. It was truly a frightening scene. Yizaiwen directly withdrew from the current spot he was at, then thundered loudly and instantly put on his divine golden clothing, releasing waves of qi in all directions, as if to sweep away the universe. Layer after layer of formidable golden divinities was surging everywhere, appearing like a golden tide. Amidst all this, Yizaiwen released an earth-shaking Bladiki and swept it away. At this moment, Yizaiwen went all out so as to not leave any margin for error. Boom! The long halberd and the long blade's tip collided with each other. It seemed like the sudden formation of mahjong tiles, which was a result of an instant rupturing of the surrounding space, as it crumbled down into a landslide of fragments. The entire space just exploded in the end. The expert suddenly looked at Yizaiwen with incomparable amazement. Only a while ago, they were planning to snatch the dragon's corpse away from Yizaiwen, but what they just saw made them feel helpless. The fifth god's power was enough to sweep away everything in front of Yizaiwen but still couldn't make him budge at all. The fifth god's pupils suddenly contracted as his complexion turned pale. He was confident that after having stepped into the second stage of half-step legendary realm, he would have more than enough power to beat Yishiwen. He never expected for Yizaiwen to have grown so strong, perhaps even stronger than him. "Yishiwen, I will end your life today." The fifth god immediately resumed his calm. His facial expression turned ice-cold as he was staring at Yizaiwen with his knife-like sharp gaze. The long halberd moved in his hands and shot a black-colored light straight toward Yishiwen. Boom! The long halberd set off boundless coercion, as if piercing the void itself, and released a murderous aura that went across the sky, all the way toward Yishiwen. Yishiwen, without hesitation, took a step and a burst of golden divinities seeped out of his body and swept out like a dreadful golden tide. It seemed as if the long blade in his hand was roaring like a golden dragon. Boom! This battle was shaking the heaven and earth. The explosions were collapsing the surrounding space, and waves of killing intention was sweeping everywhere in the sky. In fact, a large of space had already collapsed under the aftermath of collisions between their attacks. This was a terrifying matchup. Several experts felt amazed while watching this battle. Even though they were at the same level, they still weren't a match for those two. Yishiwen dropped dead. The fifth god tightly clenched his steel-like teeth and thundered out these words from his throat. His long halberd went toward Yishiwen, striking again with unparalleled black light. "If you are only at such level then today, even if the great golden immortal descends to this world, he cannot save you." Yizaiwen shouted loudly, and his long blade shot an even larger blade light toward the incoming attack. This time, he didn't restrain himself and went all out, instantly issuing an exceptionally fearful attack. Chua! The halberd and blade attacks intersected. Horrifying ripples of terror proliferated from those sophisticated weapons and spread out, sweeping the surrounding region, as if even the vacuum was crushed as a result. The dreadful explosion set off layer after layer of energy waves in all directions. Boom! The fifth god only felt a terrifying power boiling, and making its way through his long halberd before invading his hands. Bang! The fifth god was holding the halberd in both his hands before his hands fell prey to Yizaiwen's terrifying attack. Blood began to gush out of his hands, revealing cracks and bones through the open wounds. How is this possible? With an incredible look in his eyes, the fifth god found it extremely hard to believe what just happened. One must know that a month ago, in his battle with Yishiwen, he clearly had an upper hand in the battle. But in such a short period of time, only after a month's time, the tables actually turned in Yizaiwen's favor. Yizaiwen not just caught up to him but actually surpassed him. This was simply hard to believe, just like a miracle. One must know that although the fifth god had recently reached the second stage of half-step legendary realm, and was actually like a newbie on the new stage, he could easily defeat a majority of the senior experts of the same level. During that blow just now, if I am not mistaken, didn't it appear like the fifth god actually fell under the wind? Good gracious! This is insane. Only a month ago, the fifth god clear had an upper hand, but now he appears to be losing. How is this even possible? At this time, several warriors were discussing among themselves, finding it very hard to believe that that illustrious fifth god was being forced down to a disadvantageous position. How dare you hurt me, die? The fifth god bellowed. His halberd rumbled once again. The wound on hand did not seem to hinder his pace at all, as he almost instantaneously arrived in front of Yi Zaiwen once again. The end. Yi Zaiwen said indifferently and struck with his long blade, seemingly delimiting the trajectory of a meteor falling from the sky. Chapter 311. The fifth god slaughtered the forces of destruction army. Jin Young Master et al. Were stationed nearby. Although they also wanted to the end result of this battle, they couldn't put down the contention over dragon essence. They did not have the time and luxury to witness someone else's battle. A cold blade tip swept through the golden divinities and cut across all the way, releasing a burst of golden light everywhere in the sky and cracking open voids at several spots. The chaos was visible on the other side of the cracks. Boom! This collision was comparatively much more terrifying than the earlier one. The fifth god rushed toward Yi Shiwen, just like an ancient god carrying an unusually dreadful power with him that appeared to be divine in nature. Their bodies were glittering, and it seemed as if two golden statues of ancient gods had suddenly come to life, and were engaged in a crazy battle. Bang! A dreadful force ran through the halberd and penetrated into the fifth god's body, instantly rupturing his flesh and churning his blood. His huge body was sent flying horizontally all the way before maliciously crashing into a mountain peak. Everyone was dumbfounded as the battlefield had been divided into two parts. One part of the battlefield was hosting the life and death battle between Yi Shiwen and the fifth god, while the other part was witnessing a fierce competition among Jin Young Master, as well as some profound elusive experts with profound cultivations, each of them competing for the dragon essence. Although there were a lot of experts on the other side having intense fights with each other, the battle between Yi Shiwen and the fifth god was genuinely tragic. These two were ruthless, merciless, and simply did not give any value to each other's existence. Especially the fifth god, who was accustomed to being domineering and tyrannical, and this was the first time he completely fell under the wind. Moreover, among all the battles had with peers of his age and level, this was an unprecedented one. After all, not even a few of them were able to push him back to such an extent, let alone a kid like Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen did not hesitate and rushed forward while towing his long blade, step by step across the sky. It seemed as if the size of the sky was shrinking inch by inch in his presence. As his glistening figure flickered once, almost in a breath's time, he caught up with the fifth god. The long blade transformed into a long dragon, and its cold cutting edge swept down directly upon the enemy. The fifth god suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was like a blade, chilling and quite scary. He shot once again by channeling a surge of killing intention through his long halberd, all the way toward Yi Shiwen. Chua! Yi Shiwen raised his long blade to block the incoming attack. Boom! Yi Shiwen stood firmly where he originally was, but the space around him collapsed immediately under the impact of this horrifying attack. The long halberd broke the universe. The fifth god also took advantage of this opportunity to catch Yi Shiwen off guard. He was breathing heavily, had clenched his teeth with his face showing the appearance of a god that was ready to kill. Intermittent rays of golden light was twinkling through his body, and one could see a bunch of quaint illegible text flashing within his body, and slowly combining together to form an ancient scripture. It's an incomplete ancient scripture. Yi Mo exclaimed loudly. No wonder they dare to call themselves the army of God. It turns out that they really have obtained a part of God's inheritance. Ancient scripture? What is that? Yi Shiwen asked. There is a detached part of the universe, aloof from life and death. It is said that 6 fearful powerhouses jumped out of there. They claim to be gods, and some of them left behind ancient scriptures which are the essence of their spiritual life, and have recorded the entirety of their perception of the universe, along with all sorts of magical spells and whatnot. Each time an ancient scripture makes an appearance, it causes bloody battles. Yemo explained. This fifth god had possibly obtained one page of an ancient scripture. No wonder he is tough, fierce, and so hard to deal with. Gods are actually considered as taboo in Wuxia. No one knows whether such a creature really exists or is just a myth. However, whether it's a legend or not is not entirely hidden from Yi Shiwen, because he is exposed to a little something about gods. He can say for sure that gods are truly frightening creatures. Some demon beasts that seem to have the blood of God flowing in their veins were much more powerful than ordinary demon beasts. No wonder even a single page of an ancient god scripture was enough to create an earth-shattering powerhouse like the fifth god. Yi Shiwen, this is a big opportunity, ha 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 ha. Yemo shouted. So what if he only has one page? It is still priceless. You will simply be unable to estimate its value no matter how much you try. You know, it is said that the gods only taught their ancient secrets to a handful of confidants and disciples. Unless a powerhouse like that falls from the sky, there is no way to obtain such a priceless treasure. You should consider yourself extremely lucky if you manage to obtain even a single page of an ancient god scripture. Snatch it away before anyone else does. Others simply have no way to bring out the real value of this page, but if it falls into your hands, then it's a different case altogether. You will be able to parse out massive amounts of information about the ancient god scripture inside your mysterious space, which would bring immeasurable benefits to your future cultivation. Yemo and Yi Shiwen had been together for so long. Naturally, Yemo was aware of the existence of the mysterious space because Tianyuan mirror was now owned by Yi Shiwen. Hence, the tool spirit of the mirror just couldn't betray his master. Now, Yemo was like a confidant to him, and knew almost everything about Yi Shiwen apart from the fact that he had come from the earth. The fifth god's back was burning with bursts of energy, and each illegible character floating behind him contained the essence of true Tao. A unit of golden light fell upon his body and gradually healed his injuries. However, the fifth god's complexion turned even more unsightly as he realized that the ancient page in his hand couldn't be used easily. Right now, he had actually been compelled by Yi Shiwen to bring it out and use it to defend himself. However, he could clearly feel the greedy looks centering upon him from all sides. He could sense the burst of joy popping in the hearts of almost all experts present on the scene, with their eyes full of greed. Of course, this outcome was perfectly conceivable. Even if he managed to kill Yi Shiwen, the news about this ancient page would still attract numerous experts to him, let alone the members of Destruction Army, Jin Young Master, and the others whose burning hot gazes seemed extremely scary. Even an ordinary expert would be more than able to understand the preciousness of an ancient god scripture. Even if there was only one page, it would still be considered as a priceless treasure. No one could say for sure that gods really existed in this world, but there were a lot of people who believed that when someone kept on progressing and arrived all the way at the level of gods, they would acquire immortality and live forever. This was the so-called interpretation of God in the hearts of a vast majority of genius experts. The gods are not indifferent. They do not govern myriad types of things under the sun. In the heart of an expert, the god is a super strong and absolute being, and anything he leaves behind is priceless treasure. Even a standalone page from an ancient god scripture is not an exception to that. Its value is inestimable. Even more than the value of the dragon marrow, because its effects are anyway going to be for a while. But one page from an ancient god scripture, once perceived through meditation, would help one in achieving much greater benefits which would stay for a lifetime. Yi Shiwen, prepare yourself to die, said the fifth god as these words jumped out through the gaps between his teeth. His facial expression became more and more ferocious. No matter what kind of trouble he would have to face in the future, right now, the biggest problem for him was that Yi Shiwen. He vowed to himself that he would definitely kill Yi Shiwen. The fifth god's head was glowing brightly with the influence of ancient god scripture, sweeping away one after another. His state was restored to the pinnacle. His vitality was brimming as it seemed like his long halberd was applying horizontal compression on the sky, breaking the surrounding space and creating openings to the chaos. All of this was aimed at Yi Shiwen along with the surge of God's coercion that swept toward Yi Shiwen, while shaking the entire world in the process. Yi Shiwen was calm without fear. The long blade in the hand bloomed into a terrifying blade light. His golden clothes also released bursts of golden light that obscured half of the sky as the ice-cold tip of his blade cut horizontally toward the incoming attack. Bang! The tips of the blade and the halberd had a fierce collision in midair, leading to a gorgeous explosion that swept away as many things as possible in the range and opened cracks in the surrounding space. There was no comparison between the power displayed by the fifth god just now and what had been showing all this time. This was the effect of the page from an ancient god scripture, which was also his trump card. Once used, there was no turning back. A frightening force swept over to the side of the fifth god. That one page of ancient god scripture began to emit intermittent sounds of the chanting of ancient sutras from behind him. It was hard to tell how many eras had passed since the power of this ancient sutra chanting had been sealed inside that page, so as to block it from leaking outside. As the raging energy storm rushed past Yi Ziwen's body, his golden clothes danced crazily in the stormy winds. Even while facing the sudden insanely strong rise in the fifth god's power, Yi Ziwen's complexion remained unchanged. He just lightly said, "Your only option is to break through to the third stage of half-step legendary realm right now, or you shall die without a doubt. I will guarantee you that much." So long as one was not a complete fool, one could clearly sense a burning killing intention in the fifth god's heart. In fact, the fifth god never harbored a small killing intention toward his enemies, because weeding out an enemy had been his principle all along. Everyone was aghast with a sudden strike of amazement that took them off guard. Just now, they saw the power of the fifth god, but they just couldn't comprehend as to what exactly was emboldening Yi Shiwen to the extent that he openly threatened the fifth god with no hesitation whatsoever. Of course, he also seemed to have enough power to defeat the fifth god. Many experts were looking at Yi Shiwen. Such audacity, the fifth god said with a sneer. He naturally did not dare to look down on Yi Shiwen anymore, and had to put away his usual stance of overlooking all living things in front of him. However, he still could not come to terms with himself, and felt like he might be able to kill Yi Shiwen. No wonder he was offering a sacrifice by resorting to using all his might and secrets in order to defeat Yi Shiwen. Die! The fifth god shouted angrily, grasped the long halberd and rushed forward while sweeping away the overflowing godly might along with him. One could see a type of simple and unadorned aura, somewhat ancient in nature, being increasingly released by the ancient god scripture behind his body. It was really like looking at a god. He went toward Yi Shiwen while leaving behind a trail of chaos. His black halberd appeared just like a black flood dragon as it roared loudly and soared into the sky from the abyss. Today, I will let you know what disparity of strength truly means. Yi Shiwen sneered and immediately used the long blade in his hand to release a blade light as bright as the stars, dazzling the entire sky. It seemed as if Yi Shiwen was holding the entire horizon in his hand as his long blade. Bang! With a horrifying sound of the collision, Yi Shiwen and the fifth god severely crashed into each other. The page of ancient god scripture also collided severely with Yi Ziwen's golden divinities, and the impact caused the space avalanche in the surrounding region, exposing the jet-black turbulence on the other side. It was like a battle between two gods, and the scene was simply spectacular. Yi Ziwen's Bladiki contained an irresistible force, and it cut off the fifth god's golden light right away. The golden light dispersed. Figures of the two godlike warriors crisscrossed then staggered apart from each other, as the fifth god's body suddenly made a poochie sound and blood came gushing out. His tall body had been cut into two halves, slantingly downward all the way from the shoulder. There was an utter look of disbelief on his face. He just could not believe that he was defeated so easily in a blink of an eye. Then, abruptly, a big hand descended from the sky and attempted to grasp the fifth god's corpse in midair. Chapter 312. Dragon Essence is captured. Then, abruptly, a big hand that was made up of chi descended from the sky and attempted to grasp the fifth god's body. That was the old patron saint who suddenly rushed out of the competition, going on over the dragon essence, to grab the fifth god's corpse. Originally, The fifth god's corpse shouldn't have been so important to fight over, but it happened to contain one page of an ancient god scripture. The old patron saint wanted to capture the fifth god's corpse before anyone else and use the ancient knowledge contained in it to enhance his own martial art practice. It would take time because that entire page had already been refined by the fifth god, and its essence was located inside his corpse. Do you want to die? Yi Shiwen instantly waved his long blade, and that big hand, which was extending toward the fifth god's corpse, was directly chopped off and extinguished the next instant. Yi Shiwen, you've already swallowed the flood dragon's corpse and now you also want to seize the page of an ancient god scripture? The old patron saint looked coldly at Yi Shiwen and said. There was a look of greed clearly visible on his face. Even a page from an ancient scripture was enough to make anyone excited. Yes, it's mine. If you really want to die, then come on and fight me. Yi Shiwen sneered. He struggled hard in a life or death kind of battle with the fifth god. And once it was all over with his victory, that old patron saint wanted to meddle in and reap the benefits as a third party. He would certainly not allow that to happen so easily. Yi Ziwen's eyes seemed even deeper and much profound, as if the birth and death of the universe itself were repetitively taking place in the depths of his eyes. Hand over the ancient scripture to me, and we genie guards will guarantee your safety during your stay in the Ming Empire. Jin Young Master also appeared at this time, and said while completely ignoring the ongoing fight over the dragon essence. Although the dragon essence was precious as well, but when compared with a page of ancient god scripture, it was not so important actually. Forget about the experts of legendary realm. Even the sage-level experts would go crazy for something like that. The genie guards, the black-robed powerhouse as well as those elusive powerhouses of the older generation were staring at Yi Shiwen. The value of ancient scripture was simply inestimable, and it was now inside the corpse of the fifth god. The one who would capture the corpse would also get a hold of that page. Moreover, there was a possibility that one might also manage to sense the rest of the ancient scripture by using that one page as the first step. When did Genie Guard start doing the work of bodyguard for random strangers? Yi Shiwen sneered and said while making it very clear to everyone that he had his own aspirations regarding this page, and nothing could convince him to give it up that easily. Humph, you sure do know how to talk big, young man. However, you must know that sometimes, it is best for your own good to act humbly and listen to your seniors. At this time, an old man with profound cultivation stood up and said with a sneer, "Today I will teach you how to be respectful toward your seniors." The old man sneered again and blasted his fist, wielding the might of some type of terrifying boxing technique, all the way toward Yi Shiwen. The fist pressure swept over like a mighty ocean wave toward Yi Shiwen, as if to suppress the eternal domain with indomitable might. "Old fogey, you alone dare to challenge me?" Yi Shiwen sneered and slashed with his long blade, releasing a radiant blade light that darted off in all directions along with a burst of deafening sharp sound. The blade light instantly flew toward the incoming fist pressure from multiple directions. Poochie! Yi Ziwen's blade light annihilated the fist pressure in a flash by instantly cutting it into two halves. The blade light didn't stop there but went forward and directly crashed into the old man's body. Poochie! That old man was caught off guard, and was instantly cut in half by Yi Shiwen. Who else wants to try his luck? Come out right now. Yi Shiwen said as he cast his ice-cold gaze skimming through the crowd. Everyone was suddenly spellbound, had their minds blown away. They recalled how the fifth god, an expert at the second stage of half-step legendary realm, was unable to deal with Yi Ziwen's tyrannical power. He just never stood a chance against Yi Shiwen, not to mention several experts were directly slaughtered by him. No one was able to push Yi Shiwen into the disadvantageous situation throughout the course of battles so far in this small world. In fact, no one was able to occupy the winning side, even for a short time, while fighting with Yi Shiwen. The fifth god struggled for some time until he was finally killed by Yi Shiwen, which made them all aghast with amazement. Although they very much wanted to obtain the page of ancient scripture from Yi Shiwen, they didn't have the confidence to face Yi Shiwen, and immediately retreated at the first sight of him. If they couldn't face Yi Shiwen, then might as well just feign ignorance. The experts were like they couldn't do anything about it anyway, and began to hesitantly join the competition over the dragon essence. The dragon essence just lay like a dragon's corpse in the sky with a unit of terrifying attraction force originating from it that was increasingly pulling them toward the corpse. Yi Shiwen also joined the competition immediately. With a flash of golden light, a big golden hand extended toward the dragon essence. Yi Shiwen, you've already obtained so much, but you are still eyeing dragon essence. Jin Young Master said in a discontented manner. What a joke! Don't tell me that you think of this as some kind of fair treasure hunt where everyone gets a share from the treasure trove. Something like 1 treasure per person? Remember, only those who are capable get to keep the heavenly treasures. Others simply keep on waiting and just watch from the sidelines. Yi Shiwen sneered and simply didn't pay any attention to Jin Young Master's words. Jin Young Master's complexion immediately turned unsightly. He secretly vowed in his heart that he would make Yi Shiwen go through hell. After exiting this small world, he would mobilize genie guards from all over the Ming Empire, while making sure that Yi Shiwen would be meeting a tragic end no matter what. How could Yi Shiwen not know what Jin Young Master was thinking at the moment? Just by looking at his mutated facial expression, Yi Shiwen knew that he was planning to take revenge. However, Yi Shiwen was not at all bothered because of a simple reason. There are a large crowd present in the vicinity, and some of them were bound to publicize this matter as soon as they would go out. Hence, he was already prepared to face the imminent crisis and all sorts of problems and stress that were soon going to come his way. In fact, he was prepared to be chased down as well, so adding genie guards to all this mess would actually make no significant difference either. However, he knew that there was nothing to solve this issue unless he could kill everyone, otherwise there was literally no visible way to avoid the disclosure of news. Therefore, he was not planning to let go of the dragon essence because his only option was to do all he could to upgrade his own strength in an attempt to increase the possibility of his survival in the upcoming series of crisis. The top players and their respective groups simultaneously launched their attacks, concentrating their combined powers onto the dragon essence. Although it was shaped as a dragon, it wasn't a real dragon. If it was a real dragon, then it would be impossible to break defense with this level of attacks. Boom! There resounded a terrifying sound of an explosion, and the entire dragon essence shattered into pieces and spread throughout the sky. Without any hesitation, Yi Shiwen took out his Tianyuan mirror and sent it out, capturing the dragon essence's figurehead, which was located at its front end. At this time, other experts also went into action with the intention to not skip even a shred of dragon essence, capturing a piece after another, with each of them grabbing their favorite piece. Yi Shiwen went in for another attempt to grab a piece, but by this time, there wasn't much left of the dragon essence's pieces. There were only a few pieces remaining, and Yi Shiwen instantly attempted to grasp the last remaining piece. Boom! 2 big hands instantly collided in the sky. Both the Destruction Army and Yi Shiwen had spotted the same piece and tried to grab it at the exact same instant, only to end up rendering each other's attempt in vain. Meanwhile, taking advantage of this situation, other experts extended their big hands to grasp that piece of dragon essence. Humph! Yi Shiwen snorted and swept out blade light that immediately chopped down all those big hands in midair and caused them to explode. That last piece of dragon essence finally ended up in Yi Ziwen's pocket. The masters felt their complexions turning pale by Yi Ziwen's attack, but they did not continue to get involved. After all, Yi Shiwen's tyrannical power had been fully reflected while neutralizing their collaboration attack. Not to mention the way he seized that last piece just now clearly revealed his insane strength. Moreover, they were more or less satisfied right now, as all of them had managed to obtain at least 1 piece of dragon essence, with some of them obtaining over 2 pieces as well. After all of this was over, the experts did not stay there any longer and immediately left the scene in abundance. Half a month later, in the depths of the ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction, the entire ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction, as a result of losing the dragon essence, had mostly dried up in absence of nourishment from spiritual arteries. So the entire environment was very harsh, filled with sandstorms everywhere, almost to the point of exaggeration. One could see that even the experts of Truth Realm would be torn in half directly in this kind of harsh environment. The deeper they went in, these sandstorms continued to get more and more terrifying, and most importantly, It was very difficult for human experts to roam about in this environment, but there were some hidden demon beasts that were already accustomed to such an environment after millions of years of evolution. In fact, it seemed like these storms were somehow related to those demon beasts. The region ravaged by these sandstorms had become the lair of demon beast, and they had even formed a kingdom inside these giant storms. Countless demon beasts were thriving inside this demon beast kingdom. As Yi Shiwen and his team ventured deeper, they found such storms getting more and more tyrannical with a lot of turbulence in the atmosphere. They arrived in front of such a giant sandstorm, which was about 10,000 meters high and several kilometers in diameter. It simply looked like a giant war fortress that was targeting to sweep away all the enemies. Yi Shiwen blazed with anger as soon as he saw many demon beasts lurking in this sandstorm. The sandstorm was huge yet incredibly quick. Almost in a flash, it arrived in front of Yi Shiwen. The first ones to rush over were a type of sand-type demon beasts. Their bodies were wrapped in layer upon layer of sand, and each of them was at least at complete truth realm. They were working jointly to fire sand columns which then condensed together into a huge sand column, and seemed to have tremendous power of impact, enough to move the mountains. Yi Shiwen moved his palm and immediately blasted out a mysterious coiling dragon that soared out from the depths of the abyss, faced upwards and roared loudly. The huge sand column was directly torn open, and even though some sand beasts were at half-step legendary realm, they were instantly blasted away. Some were killed while some of them were severely wounded. But who was Yi Shiwen? He was an expert that had already reached the peak of half-step legendary realm, and his combat power was sufficient to defeat the experts of half-step legendary second stage, or even those at the third stage. There was no suspense in how his coiling dragon was able to tear that sand column apart. Chapter 313. Dragon Tomb. The wolf cub directly rushed forward and began an unscrupulous killing spree. The Mo siblings weren't as fierce as the wolf cub, so they just stuck to killing the sand beasts on the periphery. Yi Shiwen was also bombarding those sand beasts with unceasing attacks, one after another without the slightest pause in between. Frankly speaking, those sand beasts weren't his opponent at all. Whenever a sand beast was killed by Yi Shiwen, its essence and blood would be completely absorbed by him and instilled into the mysterious space. Inside the mysterious space, that one page of ancient god scriptures suddenly blossomed into unusually bright rays of light. The mysterious space was constantly deconstructing a variety of ancient heavenly avenues. Even a single page of ancient scriptures contained a lot of characters with each having the essence of Tao. After all, these were the scriptures left behind by the legendary gods. On the one hand, the people of Wuxia completely denied the existence of the so-called gods, but on the other hand they also believed that human beings could acquire godly powers by relying on their own efforts. Of course, this was a contradictory statement with respect to the previous one, but both of these beliefs had continued to pass down for millions of years. Inside the ancient scriptures, there was a faintly visible figure of a godly spirit that was unceasingly reciting those scriptures. It was constantly attempting in vain to break out of Yi Shiwen's body, but the mysterious space would exude bursts of 7 colored rays of light each, and every time to suppress it down. That one page of ancient god scriptures was undeniably a godly item that once belonged to a legendary godly spirit, so it was bound to contain ancient wisdom. Not to mention, it certainly must have possessed a spirit in the past. Therefore, now that Yi Shiwen was trying to comprehend the profound meanings contained in it bit by bit, this whole process seemed like a plundering-type comprehension through meditation. The ancient avenues accumulated inside the mysterious space, so far were being gradually extracted little by little, which appeared just like the spinning of a silk cocoon. Although there was only one page of ancient god scriptures to comprehend, Yi Shiwen could only dare to say that he understood some parts of it. However, he still felt that this time's harvest of knowledge and insights was far more than the knowledge he obtained by reading all those books in the library. Now it seemed like only Yi Shiwen's team was still roaming in the ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction, while others had left long ago. Yi Shiwen's harvest was just too big this time, with that one page of ancient god scriptures being the best of it. Everyone wanted to snatch it from him, and that was why most of the experts had left to inform their respective sections. They didn't have any other option but to call backup because none of the participants in this time's conquest was capable of dealing with Yi Shiwen. There were many people who did not want to leave but could only choose to leave because one could only rely upon one of the 8 sword commands to exit this small world. Otherwise, they would be trapped in this ruined world for a lifetime before collapsing together with it. This was why experts were so desperate to get their hands on the sword commands from the beginning, since capturing a sword command was equivalent to gaining the advantage of not being dependent on others. Yi Shiwen knew about their motives, so he couldn't leave this world. For the time being, he was safe here because one sword command was enough to exit this world, but all sword commands must be assembled together in order to open the entrance to this world. However, 4 of the 8 sword commands were already in Yi Ziwen's possession. He had obtained one sword command from the Mo siblings, and the other 3, by plundering them from the 5th god's corpse. Therefore it was impossible for the experts to enter this world from outside. Even if they wanted to come in, their only option was to wait for Yi Ziwen on the other side of the entrance. Because of this situation at hand, Yi Shiwen could only opt to go all out with his cultivation, and level up as fast as possible in order to cope with the terrifying attacks which might come his way sooner or later. Afterward, Yi Shiwen and his team continued to fight all the way until that small demon beast kingdom was completely wiped out by them. The fine blood and essence of the fallen demon beasts were directly absorbed by Tianyuan Mirror. At this time, Yi Shiwen and the others bypassed the sandstorm and finally reached the depths of the ruins of Wang Heavenly Faction. Before their eyes appeared the entrance to a subterranean palace with large amounts of dragon power scattered in all directions, along with some deadki mixed with it. This is dragon power. Fuck, there's so much of it. Could it be that this is actually a dragon's lair? The wolf cub suddenly gawked. His reaction was understandable. After all, the legends said that the dragon race was capable of contending with the legendary race of gods, making them one of the ruling races of 10,000 worlds. This statement was enough to showcase the terrifying influence of the dragon race. When one dragon could be considered such a tyrannical existence, a dragon's lair, or a dragon's nest to be precise, was enough to turn the sky and the earth upside down throughout the Zhan Wuxia. No, I think this is probably a dragon tomb, the final burial site for dragon lords, Yi Mo said with a frown. The deadki coming from inside is too thick and abnormally intense. It is impossible for a normal dragon's lair to have this type of deadki. Not to mention, if there really is a dragon living here, then it would have shown up already. If we enter a dragon's lair, we will die for sure. However, if this is a dragon tomb, we have hit the jackpot. The wolf cub's eyes shone brightly. Dragon race is known to hoard all sorts of treasures, and a dragon's tomb is bound to have a lot of buried treasures inside of it. Most importantly, a dead dragon's skeletal remains are genuinely considered as priceless treasures. A dragon at the end of its lifespan will automatically go to the dragon tomb and await its death, but the location of a dragon tomb is something only a few know about. In fact, the location of a dragon tomb is considered the biggest secret even among the members of the dragon race. Only when a dragon reaches the end of its lifespan will it receive the summons from a dragon tomb. After that, it can follow a kind of inherent feeling to locate the dragon tomb. Not to mention, a dragon tomb is an unequaled divine storehouse of dragon bones. Dragons are always very sensitive about their tombs, so a dragon tomb is often considered as the most dangerous place to venture into. Yi Mo said, I must go in to have a look. After all, how can you obtain a tiger cub without entering a tiger's den? I don't have any other option right now. Yi Shiwen said with a somewhat helpless smile appearing on his face. He certainly had no other choice because he knew that people must be waiting for him outside to gang up on him as soon as he would exit this small world. Therefore he must enhance his strength as much as possible. Yi Shiwen and his team entered the underground palace, and an overwhelming dragon power surged out to greet them. At this time, Yi Mo finally recognized what this place really was. This is not the tomb of a real dragon, it's the tomb of a flood dragon. Yi Mo suddenly spoke. Even so, it is definitely a big opportunity. I can tell that this dragon tomb has definitely existed for hundreds of thousands of years, long before the history of Wang Heavenly Faction even took its roots. I suspect that the Wang heavenly faction must have accidentally discovered this dragon tomb and used it as the foundation for their faction. That also explains the presence of a flood dragon egg in this small world. Yi Shiwen nodded. Of course, the tomb of a flood dragon wasn't going to be as magnificent as the tomb of a real dragon. But this would also reduce the degree of risk involved by multiple folds. Because of the intermittent waves of dragon power rushing out of the entrance to the underground palace, those muddle-headed demon beasts never dared to approach this flood dragon tomb. No wonder it seemed like this place had remained undisturbed for an extremely long time. Dragon tobacco plant. Dragon mushroom. It took just a glance for Yi Shiwen to recognize a variety of rare herbs that had been growing there for 1,000 years, or even thousands of years. These herbs were absolutely priceless, and could easily sell for over 1,000,000 ling don. One must know that such rare herbs were growing on the outside, so it would be hard to tell what they were going to find on the inside. Only in a dragon tomb was it possible to see such rare things, because right after the death of a dragon, its corpse slowly decomposed and dissolved nutrients into the earth. Not to mention its flesh and blood did the job of irrigation for such rare herbs. Yi Shiwen and the Mo siblings would have never figured out the real preciousness of these herbs, if not for Yi Mo's explanations about them. The dragon mushrooms looked like dragon-shaped spirit mushrooms, as they were exuding the fragrance of spirit mushrooms. It was said that a millennium-old dragon mushroom could increase the lifespan of a living being by over 100 years. Not to mention these dragon mushrooms were only a small part of a variety of dragon mushrooms, some of which were 2,000 years old, 3,000 years old, and could even be up to 9,999 years old. Then it would transform into a dragon mushroom king. Besides dragon mushrooms, a variety of herbs could be seen growing in the vicinity of the dragon tomb. These best quality herbs were growing outside the underground palace, and appeared like roadside weeds, as if nobody ever bothered to even touch them. The reason behind this was the decline of Wang heavenly faction that made it difficult for the outsiders to gain access to this small world. The native demon beasts of this world did not have the means to overcome their inherent fear of dragon power, so they never approached this place even if they drooled over obtaining those precious herbs. The dragon power merely acted as a suppression force upon sentient beings, but those muddle-headed demon beasts felt an instinctive fear of repression from it. Although this wasn't the tomb of a real dragon, Yi Shiwen and the others still managed to get their hands on priceless treasures. Yi Shiwen waved his hand and plundered the majority of best quality herbs in one fell swoop. Crap! You are really shameless, Yi Shiwen. The wolf cub saw Yi Shiwen making the first move and immediately rained curses on him. But he himself wasn't slow and seized over 100 spirit grasses. The Mo siblings were a bit slow and only managed to seize over a dozen spirit grasses each, but both of them were very satisfied. After all, they would be able to obtain over 1,000,000 ling don, enabling them to crush an expert of peak legendary realm quite easily. Yi Shiwen got such a rich harvest outside the flood dragon tomb. This made him look forward to check out the hidden treasure trove inside the tomb. Haha, I tell you, Yi Shiwen, this is really a significant development. In the beginning itself, you obtained so many of these herbal medicines, and most of which are capable of increasing the lifespan. It means these herbs can replenish your spiritual essence, and some can directly improve your skills as well. Yi Mo explained. You have obtained some dragon yuan grasses which can help you in balancing out the overuse of phoenix regeneration by replenishing the lost life essence. Chapter 314 Flood Dragon's Blood Pool. Yi Ziwen's heavenly phoenix regeneration was actually a supreme level secret technique. However, the consumption of life essence was something that even the phoenix race couldn't escape despite being so loved and favored by the heavens, let alone a human expert like him. It was said that at the end of a millennium of its lifespan, a phoenix reached nirvana and took rebirth after completely regaining its exhausted life essence. Yi Shiwen did not have the miraculous skill of the phoenix race, as reaching nirvana was equivalent to dying as a result of exhausting one's life essence entirely. Life essence is fundamental to maintaining the life of all living beings, and the so-called process of strengthening the foundation is to find ways to increase one's life essence reserves. While leading a pious life of martial arts practice, Every breakthrough into the next stage can increase the lifespan by a corresponding increase in the life essence. However, Yi Ziwen's consumption of life essence was just too fast. In fact, he estimated that he had already ended up consuming more than 50 years' worth of life essence, particularly while regenerating fatal wounds. He had been able to survive all those life-threatening situations all thanks to Phoenix regeneration technique, so he was reluctant to avoid using this technique even after knowing its shortcomings. Yi Shiwen could only continue to make breakthroughs one after another to offset the consumed life essence. So long as the breakthrough speed was fast enough to make sure that the regeneration rate of the life essence would always remain above the consumption rate, he should be able to survive. I will need to buy some appropriate herbs after exiting this world. Yi Shiwen nodded and said, "Yes, these herbs can be used to refine Shodan. And I have a gift to add to Shodan formula. So all you need to do is pay attention to collecting those raw materials for the medicinal pills. The refined pills always give more benefits compared to the ingredients. Not to mention you can just sell the ones you don't need. This would form a positive feedback circle, and you will never lack life essence as a result of that," Yemo said. And Yi Shiwen nodded as on the road of martial art practice, the biggest natural enemy was none other than time itself. As long as there was enough time, even a pig should be able to practice. However, the struggle of life with the heavens could never be a simple matter, because there was an absolute requirement of longer practice time to reach the higher levels of cultivation. Even if a Shodan would add only 50 years of life to one's lifespan, it was still enough to make everyone go crazy over it. It was well-known fact that the owner of an alchemy refining furnace would never lack financial resources. Of course, Yi Shiwen was aware of this and had been looking for a good opportunity to learn how to use it properly. Not to mention he had already obtained a mighty technique called Celestial Emperor Tool Refining Tactics from Yemo. It was the key to demonstrating the gate to the enlightenment of Tao, thereby making it more valuable than the ancient scriptures. Unfortunately, his Tao was not in agreement with it, otherwise his cultivation would be far greater than what it current was. However, even so, the Celestial Emperor Tool Refining Tactics was of great significance to him. The refining method of poisonous dragon water control flag had also come from the Celestial Emperor Tool Refining Tactics. Yi Shiwen and his team continued to go deeper into the underground palace. After stepping down a very long ladder, which went all the way down for 700 meters, they saw a pleasant-looking hall that was massive. It was hundreds of meters in height. They weren't able to guess the width and depth of this hall, but they certainly saw a pool of blood that was about 100 feet in length. It was exuding traces of coercion in the air. Fuck. This is the blood pool of a flood dragon. The wolf cub glanced at the pool and exclaimed. The blood pool was long and slender like a river. When looking from above, it would actually appear in the shape of a flood dragon. Legends tell that flood dragons actually belong to the species of Asian dragons, and are closest to the real dragons in terms of habits and appearance, unlike other kinds of Asian dragon variants. This flood dragon's blood pool is an irrefutable evidence of that. The wolf cub said with a sigh full of emotions. According to the legends, the depths of the dragon world has dragon blood, and if an Asian dragon gets the opportunity to take a dip in it, it would be able to wash away the blood of other demon beasts from its own blood vessels, and would acquire the pure blood of a real dragon. The gathering places of flood dragon tribal groups often have these so-called flood dragons' blood pool. A very powerful flood dragon is able to release a part of its essence and blood to form a blood pool, and some Asian dragon species can soak in the blood pool to turn into pure-blood flood dragons. Yi Shiwen looked at the wolf cub, and thought that this little beast really knew a lot about all this stuff related to dragons. However, it's such a pity that the essence and blood of flood dragon have almost been consumed completely. The remaining blood will only give some ordinary effects if applied. The wolf cub said in a disappointed tone. Yi Shiwen was not disheartened because so much blood was present in such a big blood pool. He could always extract enough essence and blood to make the poisonous dragon water control flag take a thorough rebirth with all of the deep-water black snakes evolving into flood dragons. Yi Shiwen was about to seize the flood dragon blood when the entire pool shook up all of a sudden, and a group of huge monsters soared out. More than 100 huge figures appeared in front of them in the blink of an eye. Flood dragons. How can there be so many of them? Exclaimed Emo as he remembered how hectic it had been to defeat one young flood dragon. And now that so many of them suddenly appeared out of the blue, he didn't know what to do. Yi Shiwen also saw that these monsters had dark bodies and were releasing terrifying dragon power, just like the young flood dragon that he had seen earlier. Yi Shiwen was suddenly overjoyed to see so many flood dragons at once. After all, even one young flood dragon had piqued the interest of so many people earlier. He calculated that all these flood dragons should be enough to refine all of the 108 sides of the poisonous dragon water control flag array, thereby reaching its perfection level along with an ultimate power surge. Moreover, the soul of Deepwater Black Snake King that was sealed inside the poisonous dragon water control flag would also transform into a flood dragon directly, which would then greatly increase its might. Yi Shiwen noticed that these flood dragons were different from that young flood dragon he had fought earlier. These baby dragons were originally from the Asian dragon species, and successfully transformed into flood dragons after immersing themselves into the flood dragon blood pool. Although they were at legendary first stage or second stage, they weren't as aggressive as the young flood dragon he fought previously. This difference arose from the inherent disparity between Xiantian and Hotian. Roar! The flood dragons roared simultaneously in abundance, and it seemed like the sky would be torn to shreds any time now. At this time, they suddenly spat water swords from their mouths toward Yi Shiwen. The water swords instantly punctured the sky like extremely sharp thorns before falling down toward him. The attacks of these legendary-level flood dragons were very swift and fierce. In fact, there was some kind of world law contained in those water swords, making them even more horrifying. Humph! Yi Shiwen snorted and congealed a big golden hand. The water swords were all directly grasped by that big golden hand and crushed to pieces. Fortunately, these baby dragons had recently transformed into flood dragons, so their cultivation wasn't going to be too profound, or else the situation might turn quite troublesome. The big golden hand of Yi Shiwen instantly rose against the wind, getting bigger and bigger, and almost covered the entire underground hall as it grasped toward those flood dragons. His hand was like a giant fishing net which immediately entrapped those flood dragons. They were struggling like trapped fishes, but had no way to break out of his clutches. Boom! 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 The flood dragons counterattacked furiously by spitting lightning from their mouths and violently somersaulting inside his grasp. It seemed as if thunder and lightning were dancing vertically and horizontally among cloud-covered mountains. The flood dragons were enraged as they opened their mouths to attack, but Yi Shiwen's golden hand was just too big like the layers of golden clouds. The attacks certainly did hit his golden hand, but could only set off a burst of golden ripples in the divinities. There simply was no way to break free from his grasp. Yi Shiwen's gilded tyrant form had been practiced to the 4th layer, and after passing through the baptism of both heavenly tribulation and that young flood dragon's blood, he had already reached the 4th layer's peak. Even after achieving such a tyrannical form, his gilded tyrant form didn't have a breakthrough because the 5th layer was yet to be deduced. These days the mysterious space's main task had been to continue to deduce all sorts of ancient avenues. It could be said that he obtained enormous benefits as a result of that, which broadened his horizon as well as improved his cultivation. However, the deductions of other martial arts fell down significantly. In fact, even the deduction of coiling dragon palm diminished. Yi Shiwen had obtained stunning inheritances, such as the gilded tyrant form that could grant him enough power to tear even the gods and devils to shreds. Similarly, the coiling dragon palm could break the heaven and earth when practiced to the acme level, but none of the two were complete. Each new layer needed full-fledged deduction in the mysterious space. Moreover, Yi Shiwen also lacked enough Ling Dan to fulfill the requirement, especially when the requirement was so enormous. During the last 2 weeks' time, he had continued to kill demon beasts in order to obtain their demon cores. Now he was using the cores as the last resort. That was why he set a firm resolve that he would find a way to fix this problem after exiting this world. Wealth and cultivation go hand in hand on the path of martial arts practice. This is something which will always be true. Even if Yi Shiwen had enough Ling Dan, the deduction of the next layers of such stunning secret techniques would need large numbers of Ling Dan. and a lot of time to master as well. Fortunately, he had obtained the full version of Phoenix regeneration technique, so he didn't need to deduce the missing parts for this one. However, in order to grasp it more profoundly, he must spend a lot of time to comprehend it. All of these deduction processes involved huge energy requirements which worried Yi Shiwen. However, they would certainly seem like worthwhile worries to the others. This explained why the Gilded Tyrant form didn't have a breakthrough to the 5th layer, even after reaching the peak of the 4th layer. Not to mention if it had actually reached the 5th layer, then the attacks of those flood dragons wouldn't have been able to set off ripples in the divinities. When an exceptional expert like the 5th god was completely suppressed by Yi Shiwen, these baby dragons simply didn't stand a chance against him. Yi Shiwen was basically invincible, and they would actually need a breakthrough to the 3rd stage of Legendary Realm, if they even considered giving him a good enough challenge. Yi Ziwen's big golden hand started to shrink in midair. It now appeared like a huge cage that had entrapped all those flood dragons. They simply had no way to escape from his clutches. Boom! Yi Shiwen suddenly closed his big golden hand, and more than 100 flood dragons were directly squeezed to death. Yi Shiwen was not at all hesitant in offering those flood dragons to the poisonous dragon water control flag, and began to refine them one after another. Oh! Chapter 3:15. Heavenly Tribulation appears again in comparison to a deep-water black serpent. A flood dragon's blood would undoubtedly be purer and superior in quality. Hence, if dragon blood was to be offered to the poisonous dragon water control flag, then its might would naturally grow much bigger. Yi Shiwen began to refine the corpses of baby dragons one after another, and kept on adding their essences into the flag array. It could be said that there was a huge difference between his current and previous strength levels. Even the degree of restoration of Tianyuan Mirror was quite significant this time, which was also the reason why the refining of poisonous dragon water control flag took only 1 day. This also included offering the blood of flood dragons to the flag, which ultimately led to the evolution of all deepwater black snakes into flood dragons. The wolf cub had been guarding Yi Shiwen during this period. He didn't even budge 1 step away from Yi Shiwen since this dragon tomb was a dangerous place. Although they had obtained a lot of benefits here, there was still a possibility of encountering some unexpected situations, just like the sudden appearance of those flood dragons. If Yi Shiwen had not moved into action at the right time, then his team wouldn't have come out alive of that ambush. Yi Shiwen placed the flag back into his stock. Considering the enhanced power of poisonous dragon water control flag, it could be said that his strength had also increased multiple times. In fact, he would now be able to deal with the expert of legendary 3rd stage quite easily. After Yi Shiwen was done leveling up the flag, he and the others continued to venture deeper into the tomb. As they went deeper and deeper, they could feel the gradual rise in the intensity of Inchi, as it was blowing against their faces and assaulting all their senses at once. Clusters of dead ki could be seen surging high inside the hall, intertwining into layer upon layer of clouds. The entire hall seemed like it was built at the edge of some cloud district. They could also see a primitive-looking cavern on the other side of the thick dead ki clouds. On the other side of the clouds, there was a seemingly endless pile of dragon skeletons lying on the floor. Each of the skeletons appeared like a small mountain. In fact, the original flood dragons used to be even bigger in stature. Not to mention that the real dragons were incomparably massive, almost rivaling the size of the stars. During their lifetime, dragons were known to possess supernatural powers to manipulate their own size. However, right now, their skeletons were lying motionless on the ground. Haha, I never thought that we would come across so many skeletons of the flood dragons. Was an entire group of flood dragons buried here? Yemo said. Taking a broad view ahead, there were thousands of skeletons of flood dragons in the dragon tomb. Some were small while the others were larger in size. It could be said that these skeletons definitely belonged to a large ethnic clan of flood dragons, but now they all had perished completely. Perhaps, those baby flood dragons were the last surviving members of the flood dragon clan, which had already faced destruction, or they would have never left their precious tomb unattended. In fact, their sacred family tomb had been turned into the foundation of a martial arts school. Of course, there were no explanations behind the presence of all these ladders and halls inside the tomb, besides accepting the fact that the downfall of entire Flood Dragon clan had already taken place at an earlier date. Later on, the Wang Heavenly faction must have constructed its school here using this dragon tomb as foundation. But even they met with deterioration and complete downfall with the passage of time, leaving behind a bunch of ruins for others to explore. Since these dragons had died tens of thousands of years ago, their tyrannical bodies couldn't survive the impact of time. Even though they were such powerful creatures, their flesh and blood had long been absorbed into the ground, acting as nourishment for the spirit grasses, which had been growing in the vicinity for thousands of years. Only a mountain of snow-white skeletons had survived till now, still exuding an unusual white glow that hadn't disappeared for all those years. This was certainly a sign of successful cultivation, not to mention that even the skeletons of most inferior quality in the pile belonged to Sage Realm Flood Dragons. If alive, just one would be enough to spread chaos throughout the Ming Empire. Ha ha ha, we are really lucky. The wolf cub laughed and galloped towards the mountain of skeletons. The lingering traces of dragon power simply did not have any effect on him. Even though the flesh and blood of these flood dragons had dissipated into the earth, the precious dragon scales were still intact. Moreover, these scales could be turned into full-body armors and helmets. Their value was simply unquantifiable. In short, these dragon bones were priceless treasures. Rumble. The flood dragon skeletons began to shake suddenly along with the entire dragon tomb. A strange green light suddenly lit up in their empty eye sockets, as these beasts of Sage Realm actually came back to life. Damn, Yemo suddenly said in a loud voice. It seems like this place still has the remnants of dragon souls which are bringing all these skeletons back to life. Some traces of consciousness were still left in these skeletons, which usually stayed in a latent state, unless someone tried to rob their clan's tomb. The formidable race of dragons simply couldn't be underestimated no matter what. One after another, the dragon skeletons flew up in the air while issuing frightening roars. Dragon power began to rush wantonly in all directions, and in the blink of an eye, the dragon skeletons rushed towards Yi Shiwen and the others. The dragon skeletons were flying in the air, and appeared just like dragon spirits. However, flesh and blood began to congeal out of nowhere, slowly and gradually filling their ghostly shadows. Their loud roars were shaking the world. Let's get out of here, hurry up! Yemo shouted. There was no need to say that, since Yi Shiwen and the others had already begun speeding all the way to escape. Yi Shiwen had opened his devil wings behind his back to escape at an extremely fast speed. The Emo siblings escaped together and flew directly out of the cave. Although the wolf cub wasn't as fast as Yi Shiwen, he had started to run earlier than Yi Shiwen. The wolf cub's agility skill was amazing, and so was his speed. Yemo's warning was unnecessary, because everyone already knew about the severity of situation. The resurrection of sage-level dragons was no joke. In fact, even the resurrection of the flood dragons of legendary 8th or 9th stage would be a terrible event. Even Yi Shiwen had to flee at the mere sight of sage-level dragon skeletons. They were dealing with dragon skeletons of Sage Realm, and that too more than one or two. One could easily imagine the tyranny of the situation. No wonder even the Wang Heavenly faction had been unable to lay their hands on these dragon skeletons, which had remained untouched for thousands of years in a huge hall, located on the other side of Dead Key Clouds. The rattling sound of bones colliding with each other was accompanied by terrifying screams of the resurrected flood dragons, resounding everywhere inside the underground tomb. Both Yi Shiwen and Wolf Cub were afraid to turn their heads back, but couldn't help doing so. One thing was sure, they needed to get out of there as fast as possible. Whoosh! With a shrill piercing sound, Yi Shiwen directly turned into a golden streamer of light, and escaped from the underground tomb. The wolf cub closely followed him while escaping, and stopped only after having exited the underground tomb. At this time he was breathing heavily. He was only a bit slower than Yi Shiwen, but almost had his back bitten by one of the dragon skeletons. That skeleton dragon's agility skill was not superior to that of the wolf cub, but its cultivation level was far above his. This was a clear demonstration of the saying, if you cannot run faster than the enemy, then at least run faster than your companion. These old fogies have died long ago. Why cannot they just stay dead? Geez, they just had to come back to life and cause such ruckus. The wolf cub was still gasping for breath as he said these words in an irritated tone. The intermittent roars and screeches of those skeleton dragons could still be heard arising from inside the underground tomb. The peculiar screeches of these dead creatures reminded Yi Shiwen of those terrifying screams, which used to haunt the demon island every night. However, the skeleton dragons continued to pace back and forth near the entrance of the tomb, but did not dare to come out, because stepping out of the tomb would actually suppress their consciousness, turning them into nothing more than a pile of bones. Their responsibility was just to guard this place from strong raiders. As soon as they realized that Yi Shiwen and the others had already gone out of their reach, they could only roar bitterly a few times before returning to the depths of the tomb. It's such a pity. Those skeletons are priceless treasures, but, the wolf cub said with a trace of regret appearing on his face. But we've obtained great benefits this time. Don't be greedy and learn to be satisfied with whatever you already have. Yi Shiwen said while indirectly referring to the priceless medicinal herbs. Well, I'm planning to take on the heavenly tribulation. You invoke a protective barrier around me. Yi Shiwen said. His cultivation had already reached the peak of half-step legendary realm's first stage, and including the non-stop massacre of demon beasts at his hands, which had continued for a period of half a month. His foundation had already reached a profound level, exceeding all basic requirements for a breakthrough. Not to mention, he had diligently studied the ancient scriptures for 2 whole weeks as well. He was only missing a turning point. In fact, he had noticed the need of having a breakthrough right before sacrificing the baby flood dragons to his flag, but he just wanted to finish the tomb exploration first. At present, he should be able to contend with the experts of legendary 3rd stage with the help of poisonous dragon water control flag. Hence, after having a breakthrough by successfully crossing the heavenly tribulation, he would be able to easily beat the experts of legendary 4th stage. At that time, his self-defense capabilities would also increase significantly. Choosing to cross the heavenly tribulation here was beneficial to Yi Shiwen, since the skeleton dragons couldn't step out of the tomb's entrance, while the heavy presence of dragon power in the vicinity kept the demon beasts away. In short, he could face the heavenly tribulation without worrying about being disturbed while doing so. In addition, the wolf cub was also going to use a protective barrier to isolate Yi Shiwen during the breakthrough process. With Yi Shiwen no longer concealing his true cultivation, his energy broke free and spread out. In the sky, the heavenly tribulation clouds started to gather slowly. At this time, he suddenly felt as if the heavenly tribulation had firmly locked onto him body. The dark clouds were getting denser and stronger, as the electric snakes suddenly began to shuttle back and forth across the clouds. Voila! There sounded a loud and shrill noise as the thunderclouds activated all of a sudden. Hundreds of electric snakes dived down from the clouds, rushing all the way towards Yi Shiwen. Boom! 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 A series of explosions occurred right above Yi Shiwen, as soon as those electric snakes pounded upon his divine clothing. Crash bang! At that very moment, there began a downpour of thunderbolts which crashed upon him one after another. Bang! 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 Those thunderbolts had crashed upon the gilded tyrant body of Yi Shiwen. Chapter 316. Surrounded. Although several thunderbolts bombarded on Yi Shiwen's body back to back, they still couldn't make him move even a hair's breadth. On the contrary, they had no other choice but to get completely absorbed by him. Apparently this time, the heavenly tribulation was somewhat impatient. It could no longer wait and immediately flooded the whole sky with innumerable lightning weapons. Swords, spears, halberds, and so on. Altogether 18 sorts of densely packed weapons were streaking across the sky, and just like a torrential rain, they directly fell upon Yi Shiwen. The might of each and every of these weapons was much higher than the previous thunderbolts, as if these weapons contained souls of their own. Their attack power was simply majestic as they set off endless waves of killing intention across the sky. A great number of weapons swept down from the sky like a huge storm. An exceptional terror was deeply associated with this scene. Boom, boom, boom. As soon as these weapons crashed onto Yi Shiwen's body, the impacts surprisingly produced intermittent bursts of metal clanging sound. Previously, the heavenly tribulation had been unable to injure him, but this time, these lightning weapons not just rumbled on his body, but also blew open several bloody wounds on his body. However, Yi Shiwen immediately restored his wounds using the Heavenly Phoenix regeneration technique. This time, he did not dare to be negligent. He promptly started operating Tyrant Body technique, so as to endure the barrage of impacts from these weapons, which were basically wreaking havoc upon his body nonstop. Emo's siblings were standing nearby and simply staring at him in awe because if compared with Yi Zaiwen's previous heavenly tribulation which they had seen before, today's heavenly tribulation was 10 times more intense. The last heavenly tribulation was just like a nightmare in general, while this time's tribulation was not only much more dreadful, but also unpredictable. There was literally a downpour of weapons dropping unceasingly. Such a huge change going on inside the heavenly tribulation was dangerous enough to get them twisted into pieces. However, Yi Shiwen was still entirely calm and composed, although was being continuously hacked by those lightning weapons, and in pain. A very miserable look had already crawled on his face. Indeed, this time's heavenly tribulation had also failed to budge him even a bit. Even half an hour later, the heavenly tribulation still couldn't have the slightest effect on him. Therefore it could only resentfully disperse in the end. However, Yi Zaiwen's imposing aura was more frightening than before, which completely engulfed his wounds, and started to heal them gradually. Yi Shiwen breathed out with satisfaction as he finally entered the second stage of half-step legendary realm. Considering his current strength, he was now much more confident than ever. Now, even the experts of the legendary fourth peak couldn't stand any chance against him. Yi Shiwen felt that now he had some strength for self-defense, but was pretty obvious that this was far from enough. But no matter what, it had already been beyond his control, so he needed a massive amount of Ling Dan to cultivate. He had several techniques to practice, so the constant need of Ling Dan couldn't be ignored. Although his Tianyuan mirror could condense Ling Dan, the produced quantity was far from adequate. Moreover, they could continue to stay inadequate like this for a lifetime. The heavenly tribulation eventually dispersed, and since it had been crossed through by Yi Shiwen, the usual scenery of sandstorm had been replaced by a calm and tranquil sky without a shred of clouds across thousands of miles. Yi Shiwen looked towards the slowly approaching Emo siblings and the wolf cub, and said, "I have decided that I will wait for a while before leaving here, while you people continue staying here for at least 10 days before going out." This matter had already been properly discussed among them. In this group, Yi Shiwen was the strongest one, while the strength of Emo's siblings was far inferior to his. So if they went along with Yi Shiwen, then would definitely become a huge burden for him. It would be better if Yi Shiwen left alone because he wouldn't need to tend to 2 or more people at the same time. Even withdrawing in a dire situation would be easier for him. Furthermore, he would apportion the sword command she had seized from the fifth god amongst them, so that they could exit this small world anytime and anywhere using those sword commands. After having explained everything to them, Yi Shiwen immediately opened the gate of the ruins and went out. Yi Shiwen is here." The moment Yi Shiwen's figure appeared in their line of sight, the scouts of major forces instantly recognized him because his picture had long been spread throughout the major forces. Just one page of ancient god scriptures was worthy of sending any major force into frenzy. Several experts had arrived near the entrance to the ruins of Wang Heavenly faction, and were continuing to come as well. Although Yi Shiwen had obtained merely one page of the god's ancient scripture, this news had still spread throughout the major forces, making countless people to direct their gazes over here. "It really is him, that's for sure. Hurry up and report. Today this kid is going to die," one of the scouts of a major power hastily said. "Yi Shiwen is really stupid. Unless he hides there for a lifetime, it is absolutely impossible for him to evade the murderous chase of our army of God. Could it be that he thinks that just by hiding there for half a month, he would be able to escape this tragic fate?" A member of the army of God coldly said. Suddenly all sorts of summoning talismans soared in the sky, sending reports that Yi Shiwen had finally shown up after half a month. Yi Shiwen, they have already issued summoning talismans. Be prepared for a fierce battle. Yi Mo said. And Yi Shiwen nodded. He did not prevent these scouts from sending out the summoning talismans because there were too many of them, and he did not have the means to stop them all. It seemed like many forces were interested in obtaining the power of ancient god scriptures. Yi Shiwen died. A roar suddenly resounded throughout the sky. At this moment, the sky already had dozens of rainbow lights flitting across the sky, as if trying to delimit the sky into several parts. A few dozens of warriors were all floating in the air, constantly releasing an unscrupulous aura from their bodies. Besides, they were being led by several experts who were powerful enough to actuate the atmospheric Lingqi with a mere hand gesture. Yes, they actually the battle efficiency of legendary level. Amongst them, 2 experts especially possessed exceptionally tyrannical imposing aura. One of them was roughly 27 or 28-year-old youth with divine-looking gracious facial features, while his golden-colored robe was making his appearance look quite extravagant and classy. The person beside him looked more or less the same as him. This person's facial features were also quite gracious, making him look exceptionally attractive with a handsome face. He was clad in a long golden robe, but appeared a little younger than the previous one, roughly 25 or 26 years old. From the discussion of the surrounding people, Yi Shiwen could at least figure out this much, that one of these 2 men was the 3rd god, while the other one was the 4th god, both belonging to the army of God. To Yi Shiwen, the appearance of these 2 men and the previously met 5th god seemed very much alike, with almost the same temperament, as if they really were gods in general. And right behind them, there were dozens of breathtaking warriors, and each one of them was an invincible character of half-step legendary realm. One could tell that each of them was favored by the gods and held supreme dominance in their respective regions. Thus the inside story of the existence of the army of God could be clearly inferred. Yi Shiwen swept his eyes around and noticed that there was the insignia of army of God on the bodies of these experts. It seemed like all forces of the army of God, which should have been dispersed throughout the Ming Empire, had concentrated here to encircle and annihilate Yi Shiwen. These super experts, who have the insignia of the army of God on their hands, are more than enough to flatten the major influences of Yangon City. But today they have assembled to deal with Yi Shiwen. This is nothing. Actually, Yi Shiwen has beheaded the 5th god, and that thoroughly enraged the army of God. This has also triggered the anger of the high-level experts, who are now blazing with fury. Look at those 2 men who are leading the powerhouses of the army of God. Aren't they the 4th god and the 3rd god? It is reported that the army of God has altogether 5 great gods, but there is a huge difference among them on the basis of their strength. Speaking of which, actually the 5th god was the weakest one, while the 4th god and the 3rd god are far above the 5th god based on their respective strength levels. It is said that the 2nd god and the 1st god have already left the Ming Empire for the Qin Empire. So now, the Ming Empire is left with only 3 gods. And since the 5th god was killed, 3rd god has taken the task of sealing off the place, while the exploration of these ruins has fallen into the hands of the 4th god. In short, they have collectively started out on a trip, and perhaps this is not the so-called rage of the army of God. Are you Yi Shiwen? That 27 or 28-year-old youth asked. He was actually the 3rd god who was coldly staring at Yi Shiwen at this moment. He held a very commanding position in his army. His facial features were solemn while his stare was quite bone-chilling, as if was about to turn into a sharp sword to behead Yi Shiwen right here right now. Yes. Yi Shiwen nodded. So you are the one who killed the 5th god. The 4th god gazed at Yi Shiwen with his heart-chilling sharp eyes, as if a ferocious beast had selected a human to devour till its heart content. In spite of being aware of Yi Shiwen's real identity as the killer of the 5th god, he still asked in an inquisitive manner. Yi Shiwen also had nothing to hide, so he slightly nodded in response. Good. The 3rd god coldly glared at him. His face was expressionless, as it seemed as if he was looking at a dead man. Yi Shiwen was just like a tiny ant in front of him. Today, it would be very difficult for you to fly away from here even with your wings. So if you have any last words to say, go ahead. The 3rd god seemed very lenient when he said that, but was actually very cold and detached person in reality. That was why he talked about the death of the 5th god quite indifferently. Actually, the army of God had been established a long time ago, but nothing grave like this had ever happened since then. If the first and the second gods had not left the Ming Empire, then perhaps they would have personally moved into action. In his eyes, Yi Shiwen was already dead, so at present, the only thing he was concerned with was, at what time Yi Shiwen would finally perish. Listen, Yi Shiwen, hand over the ancient god scripture to me, and we genie guards will guarantee your safety. At this time, a loud sonic boom resounded in the sky. It was followed by the arrival of a large fleet of warriors streaking across the sky. Dozens of warriors had arrived on the scene. They were all clad in the uniform of genie guards, and none of them appeared weaker than the members of the army of God. There were also a few legendary-level experts among them, with each releasing intense killing intention in the vicinity. This group was quite eye-catching in a way. And the one on the front was the famous genie young master, whom Yi Shiwen had seen earlier. Yi Shiwen knew that this should be the master of genie guards. Yi Shiwen, hand over all of the items which you have obtained in the ruins, and you shall live. Genie young master said in a cold voice. He was quite pleased by the fact that Yi Shiwen had been surrounded, and didn't seem to have any way out. Earlier, Yi Shiwen had been too strong and expert to deal with. In fact, even genie guards hadn't dared to face him. However, now that the tables had turned against Yi Shiwen, it was the perfect timing to ask him to surrender obediently. Genie guards, I never thought that so many of these experts would arrive here. Could it be that Genie Young Master has called backup from Yangon City as well as from nearby cities? Exactly. That one page of ancient god scriptures is said to have alarmed the entire organization of genie guards. If there was enough time, then more genie guards are estimated to arrive. Encircled by both the army of God and genie guards, I am afraid it is really a dead end for Yi Shiwen this time around. Chapter 317. Yi Shiwen, you will die today for sure, and I will also make sure that by the time I am done with you, you will be left unable to even beg for your life. The fourth god tightly clenched his steel-like teeth and his handsome face twisted fiercely. Actually, these 5 great gods had grown up together. They shared a close brotherly bond amongst themselves. To them, the news of a brother getting murdered by Yi Shiwen had been quite devastating. He simply wished in his heart to thoroughly destroy Yi Shiwen by crushing his bones to dust. Humph, don't be so full of yourself. There are several others who want to kill me, so you alone are nothing but inconsequential. Yi Shiwen sneered and said. One could see that both sides no longer cared to give face to each other. There was nothing that could ease them now. You are courting death. The fourth god was thoroughly enraged by Yi Ziwen's response. A long spear instantaneously appeared in his hand, and he immediately swept out a terrifying spearlight that rushed towards Yi Shiwen at a tremendous speed. It crossed the expansive sky, rippling along the way, while it seemed as if the world would be broken into pieces any time now. Many spies were present in the surrounding, and all of them held their breath in astonishment. They noticed that the fourth god actually had the strength of half-step legendary realm's 4th stage. Although he had recently stepped into the half-step legendary realm 4th stage, he wasn't even 50 years old. Even the old experts of 100 years of age and above were able to achieve barely half-step legendary 4th stage or so. Hence it could be seen that the strength and talent of the fourth god had already reached a considerably higher level. Even in the entire southern region, the experts with almost the same age as him couldn't achieve the same level as he had achieved. At this moment, Genie Young Master, who was standing nearby, also saw that, and it instantly stole away the color of his face because he was only at half-step legendary 3rd stage, and that too, because he had recently consumed a piece of dragon essence. Actually, Genie Young Master was considered as a top genius not only in the Ming Empire, but also in the entire southern domain. In fact, since his debut, he had always been at the top. When compared to the 5th god, he was not bad. However, compared with the 4th god, he actually fell short by a bit. Not to mention that he couldn't possibly be compared with the first 3 gods. Furthermore, there were other powerful forces like the 7 Star Lords on this ancient road. Such comparison suddenly made it somewhat hard for him to accept his powerlessness, turning his face a bit gloomy. Yi Shiwen snorted coldly. In a flash, a long halberd emerged in his hand. This halberd actually belonged to the fifth god. Yi Shiwen didn't even know the material used in its formation. At that time, when the battle between him and the fifth god had ended in the death of the latter, this halberd had surprisingly remained intact. Yi Shiwen brandished the halberd from his hand and instantly shot it up into the sky. It pierced through the sky to face the astonished Spurky that had been shot by the opposite party. Although Yi Ziwen's halberd technique was not profound as it was not obtained as an extraordinary inheritance, yet the sheer might used by him in this halberd attack had more than compensated for all that. In fact, the power displayed by this halberd this time was far more terrifying than that by the fifth god. Previously, Yi Shiwen had stayed in the library for several months. There, he had studied all sorts of martial techniques, as well as the so-called avenues of the martial arts. Although he could not become proficient in all of them, his tyrannical strength was more than enough to balance out what was lacking. Bang! The golden beam of the halberd instantly collided maliciously into the majestic Spurky, causing a huge pressure that crushed the space. It resulted into an immense shockwave that set off energy storms in all directions. Ah, fifth brother! The moment the fourth god saw the long halberd in Yi Ziwen's hands, his eyes immediately turned red while his already fierce facial expression turned even more eerie. He gave out a loud bellow which vibrated throughout the surrounding space. An icy cold and piercing killing intention suddenly blasted out from his body and scattered everywhere. The experts present in the surroundings immediately felt this intense killing intention, and quickly drew a few steps back. His killing intention was so frightening that some of the spies with comparatively weaker strengths felt as if they would be shattered into fragments. Yi Shiwen, I will strangle you to death. The fourth god shouted ferociously with a touch of callousness and arrogance in his tone. His chi enveloped the world itself just like a vast ocean, and swept towards Yi Shiwen to engulf him completely. Die! The fourth god snarled aggressively, which shook the space before shattering it into pieces. His grandiose, imposing aura swept across and engulfed the surrounding area as he rushed towards Yi Shiwen. At that time, he looked exceptionally scary, like a mountain hurling towards Yi Shiwen. Get lost! Yi Shiwen also roared loudly. His golden divine cloak draped over his body instantly. He also started the operation of gilded tyrant form. He swept out his halberd, rocking the entire space in the vicinity. His chi engulfed the opposite party's imposing aura. The golden tide that he had swept out had already blotted out the entire sky. Boom! Both sides collided with each other in midair like two stars. In that split second, a large area in the surrounding space crumbled down while the dazzling light spread out in the horizon like millions of arrows made up of blade light, streaking across the sky at once. In the face of such a terrible collision, whether it was the army of god or genie guards, all withdrew as far as possible, so as not get swept away by the aftermath of this collision. Even though they were the leaders of their respective domains, this collision was too dreadful for them to withstand. Bang! After the collision occurred, the energy waves swept out and shattered the surrounding space, shocking everyone in the process. Just what kind of force was this attack comprised of that it led to such a terrible collision? Bang! A figure was instantly sent flying out of that group of dazzling light. Unexpectedly, it turned out to be the fourth god. The fourth god had released such an invincible imposing aura only a while ago. But now his clothes were completely tattered while his hair was all messy. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Everyone's eyes shrank as they hadn't expected that the person who would be sent flying out like this would actually turn out to be the fourth god. Actually, that terrible explosion was caused by Yi Shiwen. Indeed, Yi Shiwen was extremely strong. However, Yi Shiwen didn't even wait for him to catch his breath and quickly leapt up, making his way through the space avalanche and rushed towards the fourth god. The Lingqi in the atmosphere had gone completely chaotic. The turbulent flow of Yi Ziwen's long halberd directly broke through this chaotic aura, and like a black flood dragon, it swiftly dashed towards the fourth god to bite him. Hey, stop! The third god was very much confident of his brother, but hadn't thought that during that horrifying collision, it would actually be the fourth god to fall into a disadvantageous position. Moreover, he was almost on the verge of being killed by Yi Shiwen. Sensing the situation, The third god immediately shot out a move that took the shape of a big hand, and rushed toward Yi Ziwen's long halberd at a lightning speed. The third god was stronger when compared to the fourth god. He had almost stepped into half-step legendary 5th stage. In fact, had he not received the news of the 5th god getting killed, he would have already stepped into the 5th stage after a closed-door training session. When I decide to kill someone, no one can save them. Yi Shiwen snorted coldly. The situation had taken a turn where there was no room for reconciliation between him and the army of God. Now it had become a matter of life and death for both sides. Either Yi Shiwen would kill them or the army of God would kill him. All of a sudden, a blue vein burst open in Yi Ziwen's right hand as he pulled back the long halberd and instantly shot it towards the fourth god. The halberd darted forward while absorbing the very soul of the expansive sky. Yi Shiwen had already reached the peak of the 4th layer of gilded tyrant form. Surely, one could imagine the sort of tyrannical force that he would have used to throw that halberd just now. Yi Shiwen swiftly turned around and shot out his palm. In a flash, a coiling dragon came out from his palm, raised its head upwards and gave out a loud roar before soaring up into the sky. Then, it immediately flew towards that big hand of the third god. Boom! The coiling dragon collided with the third god's big hand, which was made up of Lingqi. Afterwards, it tore that big hand into shreds and flew towards the third god to gobble him up. At the same time, that long halberd, which had transformed into a black flood dragon, also galloped towards the fourth god. The experts of Army of God immediately moved into action. They absolutely could not allow the fourth god to be killed in front of them. They were thoroughly enraged when the 5th god had been killed in front of them, but now if the 4th god was to die before their eyes as well, then their faith would surely collapse. An expert of half-step legendary 1st stage directly went forward and stretched out his hand, and made a futile attempt to grab that long halberd. Whoosh! The sound of the terrific friction was heard by everyone as the bones in his hand were shattered and blood began to ooze out from the wound. In fact, his whole body was affected by the terrifying force contained in that halberd. He fell down from the sky while the blood sprayed out from his body. However, his attempt had slightly delayed the advancement of the halberd. This gave opportunity to many experts to arrive in front of the halberd. Yet nothing could resist the tyrannical force of that halberd as it broke through all their defenses. Even the experts of half-step legendary 2nd stage couldn't stop it, and were directly reduced to a group of blood mist. This halberd was simply unstoppable. It took quite long to describe the entire scene, but all of this happened in just a moment. The halberd ultimately broke past the layers of experts, and arrived in front of the fourth god. Pucci! The halberd pierced through the body of the fourth god, and directly nailed him to the ground. Boom! As soon as his body was nailed to the ground by the halberd, his blood splattered out. It had directly crushed his soul before virtually crucifying him. He lost his life that very instant. The third god went crazy due to rage as he saw the death of the fourth god. Not to mention that it had happened right in front of him. This feeling was more heart-wrenching than the grief caused by the news of the 5th god's killing. After all, the 5th god hadn't been killed before his eyes, while the fourth god was killed right in front of him. Surely, this unbearable feeling had pierced his heart. Fourth brother! The third god bellowed as his fierce imposing aura swept across in all directions. The third god ferociously roared. His eyes were bloodshot as he gradually walked towards Yi Shiwen while towing his long blade. Each and every one of his steps trod down the space, as his imposing manner was rising with each advancing step. An intense killing intention swept out towards Yi Shiwen to lock him down on the spot. Chapter 318. Bang! The earth trembled due to the might of the third god, and a golden light emitted from his body, which spread throughout the vast sky. All the spies of the major forces got stunned as their bodies were covered in cold sweat. The third god had not begun to attack yet, but his terrifying might had already swept over in all directions. Genie Young Master's face turned pale as he stepped back. He considered himself as the top disciple of the younger generation, but the fourth god, who was already at the half-step legendary 4th stage, had died in the hands of Yi Shiwen. This indicated that Yi Shiwen was even fiercer than the fourth god. However, this third god was even more powerful than the fourth god. A formidable breath swept across the surroundings. Now there simply was no means for anyone to approach him. For a formidable master like him to use his full power against this young genius was already a matter of joke. Yi Shiwen die. The third god clenched his steel-like teeth and squeezed out these few words before rushing towards Yi Shiwen in a flash. The golden Zhenyuan rushed out from his body and turned into a sea of golden energy before surging towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's golden body also emitted a large amount of golden Zhenyuan, which similarly swept towards the third god. Bang! The golden divine energies collided, and while looking from afar, it seemed as if two oceans made of gold had collided. The frightening shock waves swept all over the sky, and both of them stepped upon their respective sea of gold and ferociously pounded into each other. Two long blades hit each other, and a monstrous storm swept across everywhere. It seemed as if the space itself would collapse any time now. Yi Ziwen's imposing aura surged up once again, and his golden clothes flared up. Finally, Yi Shiwen didn't hold back and went all out, releasing the entirety of his strength of half-step legendary second stage in one go. By relying on all sorts of secret techniques, Yi Ziwen's intrepid strength was simply beyond anyone's imagination. Puff! In the third god's hand, the web between the thumb and the forefinger cracked open and blood splashed out. The entire blade was stained with blood. Yi Shiwen also felt a giant force pounding into his own body as the long blade hit him. He suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest, but immediately felt it disappearing. Although the third god was very strong, only a tiny step away from entering the half-step legendary fifth stage, his overall strength was not less than that of Yi Shiwen. However, his body was not as strong as Yi Ziwen's, hence his attack couldn't injure Yi Shiwen. What? Was the third god injured just now? A chill ran inside everyone's backs. The third god had obtained fame at a very early age, even before stepping on this ancient road. Earlier, people in the Ming dynasty did not know him, but after he had stepped on this ancient road, no one could injure him even among his peers. There really was no such master who could hurt him. However, that same third god had been injured today. It was not because of any trick or conspiracy. It was a fair battle between two equally strong fighters, and the third god had actually been defeated by Yi Shiwen. The wounds on the third god's hands healed rapidly, leaving only the scars behind. A formidable master like the third god obviously had some kind of healing technique in his arsenal, although much inferior to the Phoenix regeneration technique, yet good enough to deal with such small wounds. The third god held the long blade in his hands and stared at Yi Shiwen with a cold look in his eyes. His icy gaze made everyone tremble with fear as his long blade was pointed at Yi Shiwen. You are very strong, no wonder fifth brother and fourth brother have died in your hands, but today you are doomed. You cannot escape from my hands. The third god sneered and said. The third god had great self-confidence, and his self-confidence arose from his strength. His strength was enough to dominate the young generation. And even when compared to the experts who were more than 100 years old, he was not that bad. The cold tip of the blade burst into a frightening radiance, overflowing with murderous intention. The third god raised his long blade and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen in the blink of an eye. The blade instantaneously slashed towards Yi Shiwen. It was an invincible blade technique, and no one could guess from where he had obtained this inheritance. It seemed as if the blade would cut the world, as if it would cut through the very flow of time. Yi Shiwen laughed coldly as the long blade danced in his hands again, emitting a bright moonlight in the sky which took the shape of a beautiful moon diagram. It was as bright and dazzling as the sun. The two long blades collided again. The third god's blade and Yi Ziwen's full moon creative concept banged maliciously into each other, setting off burning hot rays of light in all directions. Bang! Both the third god and Yi Shiwen had put all their effort into this attack and were exhausted. As a result of this time's collision, both of them had their hands injured. People were watching from afar with their eyes wide open. They could tell that this time's collision was more ferocious than the one from a moment ago. Yi Shiwen, you cannot waste time. Yi Mo said suddenly. As time passes, more and more masters will come. Now it's only the army of God and the genie guards with whom you have to fight. But if they are grouped together with other forces, you will not be able to deal with them. And what if an old monster shows up? Then, even with the devil wings, you will not be able to escape. Yi Zaiwen's heart shook because since the time he had come out, he had been trying to escape. However, the army of God and the genie guards had blocked his way so that he couldn't escape. He did not have time to waste here. And since the words about him coming out of the small world had already spread out, more and more masters would continue to arrive here. At that time, even if really wanted to escape, he would most likely fail to do so. The look in Yi Zaiwen's eyes was getting colder and colder. The third god must be killed quickly, otherwise, the consequence could be disastrous. As far as the genie young master was concerned, Yi Shiwen simply couldn't care less. Although the genie guards were considered as a monstrous presence in the Ming dynasty, they were also the personal guards of the emperor. There were a large number of experts in the capital city, but only some of them could be mobilized in this peripheral region, with the strongest among them being at half-step legendary 4th stage. In fact, the strength of these experts was almost comparable to that of the 4th god. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen was presently dealing with the 3rd god, so he couldn't possibly be bothered by the likes of them. Certainly, if he continued to stay here for longer, the genie guards from other places would gather here, and at that time, the situation would be different. Thankfully, genie guards didn't have their main forces readily available in the nearby regions. Therefore, the 3rd god must be killed as quickly as possible. The long blade in Yi Zaiwen's hand released a strong beam of light. His left hand issued an enormous aura as the Han seal appeared in his hand. Yi Zaiwen's facial expression turned from ice-cold to merciless. He had made up his mind to slaughter the 3rd god. Hence there was no hesitation in his heart, and neither was he going to hold himself back. This scene was just too terrifying, as the MT-Tai itself was taking shape at this time. The 3rd god's complexion changed for the worse, as this was the first time his usual dignified countenance had fallen under the wind, but he still didn't lose his confidence. His dignified demeanor had been shaken by the unexpected win of Yi Shiwen a while ago. Although he would not admit it, his confidence had been thoroughly shaken for a moment. Yi Shiwen waved the long blade in his hands, but this time, it didn't appear to pierce the sky like usual. It was a rather mediocre slash, as it seemed as if an old man had barely managed to wave the blade in his hands. The blade attack directly cut its way through the sky to descend upon its target. However, the 3rd god couldn't interpret even the slightest bit of meaning that was hidden in Yi Zaiwen's attack. The long blade appeared quite slow, but in reality, it was moving very fast, and had almost arrived in front of the 3rd god. The 3rd god's hair fluttered frantically as the sharp blade wind blew against him. The 3rd god's reaction was full of resentment, as he no longer dared to look down on Yi Shiwen. As soon as Yi Shiwen was ready to launch his attack, the 3rd god had also prepared an attack of his own. Clang! Soon, a melodious metal clanging sound resounded everywhere, appearing to be disseminating from the prehistoric times after having crossed the river of time. This strike appeared rather mediocre, and there was nothing strange about it either, but the blade wind it swept out was incomparably sharp. Puff! Blood splashed out from both of their bodies as they had been simultaneously struck by blade winds. The ice-cold blade wind had torn open their flesh. Even the so-called tyrant body of Yi Shiwen had been sliced open almost instantly by the blade wind. Yi Zaiwen's wounds were a few inches deep and few feet in length. He had received terrible wounds all over his body. However, the 3rd god's condition was even more miserable than Yi Zaiwen's. Since his body was not as strong as that of Yi Shiwen, hence the blade wind had caused deeper injuries on his body, reaching all the way to his bones. Yi Shiwen sneered, and suddenly, the Phoenix regeneration technique started repairing his wounds. The 3rd god was also restoring the wound on his body, but the healing rate was far less than that of Yi Zaiwen's. Although his wounds had started to heal as well, it was nothing like the way Yi Shiwen had healed his wounds within a few breaths' time. Not just that, his battle strength had also been restored to the peak. Die! Yi Shiwen roared as his whole body appeared like a vast ocean, as if rushing forward to topple the mountains and overturn the seas. With a burst of golden energy beneath his feet, Yi Shiwen instantly unleashed his long blade and rushed towards the 3rd god. Although the 3rd god had not yet recovered, He just didn't have a way out of this precarious situation because Yi Shiwen had already attacked. At this time, Yi Shiwen went all out. Since the third god was already wounded, it was important to kill him off once and for all. Bang! Summoned by the Han seal, a huge mountain took shape in the sky all of a sudden and fell directly upon the third god. Bang! The third god got smashed as his flesh and blood splashed out everywhere. His left hand, which he had used to block the incoming attack, was completely broken. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.